In the third year of my marriage to Ethan Carter, he met his soulmate. To give her a proper title, he used every possible method to force me into a divorce. My family was ruined. I fell into severe depression. And eventually, on a rainy night, I was hit by a truck and killed. Meanwhile, his precious darling was under his meticulous protection. I never even had the chance to see her face. Reborn into the same life, I decided to give up and wait for the divorce, planning to leave before it happened. But unexpectedly, Ethan wouldn't let me go so easily this time. The banquet hall was filled with a mix of chatter and laughter. I sat quietly in a corner, listening to a young actress, Ella Chun, chatting with her manager. "Why don't you go and say hi to Ethan Carter?" her manager asked. Ella's expression faltered slightly. "Mr. Carter doesn't like being too high profile," she replied. Her manager chuckled. "True. A man like him naturally becomes the center of attention in any crowd. If the paparazzi catch anything, it wouldn't be good for you. He's protecting you." Ella's face turned red, and she said shyly, "Mr. Carter is very good to me. Just a few days ago, when I said my car broke down and was sent for repairs, he immediately gave me a new one. Lately, he's even been asking where I'd like to buy a house." The manager sounded envious. "Well, keep it up. Mr. Carter likes you so much. Make sure you win him over. After all, his wife is just a figurehead." I swallowed a bite of chestnut cake. That so-called figurehead wife they were talking about was me. But it's no wonder they looked down on me. In the 3 years of my marriage to Ethan, his rumors with other women never stopped. Though he wasn't in the entertainment industry, his name always appeared in the gossip columns. In my past life, hearing such discussions would have left me furious, demanding explanations. Now, Reborn, these words no longer stirred any waves in my heart. After all, I knew that all these women were just fleeting distractions for Ethan, and his true love would appear today. Strangely, I hadn't seen her yet. Feeling bored, I was about to leave when Ella let out a sharp scream. A waiter had accidentally spilled champagne, splashing it onto Ella's white designer dress. Her face instantly darkened. "What are you doing? This is Elisab's haute couture from this year. Get your manager here right now." The young waitress, her eyes brimming with tears, apologized repeatedly in a soft voice, explaining that she was just a summer intern. But Ella refused to let it go. Feeling sorry for the waitress, I sighed and said, "Don't make it hard for her. I'll compensate for the dress." Ella raised her brows, sizing me up. Seeing my understated and casual outfit, she clearly didn't take me seriously. "Big words. Do you even know what haute couture is? Do you think you can just buy it with a bit of cash?" The commotion caught Ethan's attention. He frowned and walked over. Ella, seeing her savior, immediately clung to his arm and said pitifully, "Mr. Carter, the haute couture dress you gave me was ruined by this waitress." The young waitress froze when she saw Ethan. Ella noticed and smugly lifted her chin. I smirked faintly, watching Ethan. "It's just a dress. I'll pay for it," I said. Ethan shot me a cold glance before turning to comfort Ella softly. "It's just a dress. I'll get you a new one later. You should head back now." He left with Ella, leaving the young waitress standing there in a daze. I always knew Ethan was irresistible to women, but I hadn't expected even such a young girl to be captivated by him. I glanced at the waitress with a hint of pity and turned to leave. Just then, the girl called out to me, "Ma'am, thank you so much for today. Could I add you on WeChat and treat you to a meal someday?" I waved her off. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." As I was about to leave, the floor manager approached and scolded her softly. "Lila Moore, how could you be so careless?" It felt like a bolt of lightning struck my mind. I turned sharply to look at the girl. It was her. She was Lila Moore, the woman Ethan had once been willing to destroy everything for, even severing ties with his family, to force me into a divorce and give her a title. My family had an alliance with the Carter family, and a divorce would have entangled countless interests. But Ethan didn't care. He was determined to leave and even offered me an extremely generous financial settlement. Unfortunately, back then, I couldn't let go. I didn't want the money. I only wanted him. I had loved him for 6 years. Why should some random girl come out of nowhere and take him away so easily? In my previous life, I tried every method possible to avoid a divorce, pushing Ethan Carter further and further away until we became adversaries. In the end, he used ruthless means to force me into signing the divorce papers. Loving him but unable to have him, I spiraled into despair and ultimately met a tragic end. Reborn. I no longer wanted to play the role of the bitter, spiteful supporting character in someone else's story. I refused to let someone who didn't love me make me feel worthless or question my self-worth ever again. I remembered how, upon learning of Lila Moore's existence in my past life, I had done everything I could to meet her. Ethan found out and immediately warned me, if I dared to approach her, he would terminate all cooperation between the Carter family and the Jung family. I cried and asked him, "What does she have that I don't?" He looked at me with disgust and said, "Lila is pure and innocent, the embodiment of everything good. Other than being less refined than you, she surpasses you in every way. This time, Reborn, I've come to understand many truths. Love, for instance, defies reason. I bet on him once and lost. Now, I've learned to accept my defeat. But still, I couldn't completely suppress my curiosity. I wanted to see for myself what kind of person Lila was, how she could be so extraordinary. Looking at the delicate, beautiful girl in front of me now, I had to admit that she did indeed embody the word lovely. "Miss." Lila's voice broke my thoughts as she called my name. "Are you adding me on WeChat?" On an impulse, I agreed, pulling out my phone to scan her code. The banquet eventually came to an end, but the night was still young. Today was actually my birthday. In previous years, I'd spend the evening in the empty villa, meticulously preparing a table full of dishes. I'd hold on to the faint hope, what if he remembered to come home? But every year, I waited in vain. I'd find excuses for Ethan's absence, blow out the candles on my own, and softly whisper to myself, "Happy birthday, Jenna." I always believed that sincere effort would eventually move even the hardest heart. After so many years, even a block of ice should have started to melt. But Ethan's heart was colder than steel. This time around, I was done waiting in that empty house, clinging to foolish hopes. Before I met Ethan, waiting for someone was one of the things I hated most. Resolving to let go, I instructed the driver, "Turn around and head to Arctic Sea Bar." On the way, I unexpectedly saw Ethan's car parked by the roadside. Next to it lay a toppled bicycle, suggesting an accident. Upon closer look, I noticed Lila Moore sitting on the ground, blood visible on her leg. Ethan was supporting her while speaking to Ella Chan through the car window. "You should head back first," he told her. Ella's expression through the rolled-down window was one of reluctance. Ethan noticed my car and gestured for me to stop, keeping my face expressionless. I rolled up the window and instructed the driver to speed up. Through the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of Ethan's bewildered expression. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of joy. Later, as I settled into the bar, I heard a commotion from the crowd. Someone was proposing. A man knelt on one knee, holding a diamond ring, surrounded by friends waving glow sticks. The woman covered her mouth in surprise before nodding, tears in her eyes. The man, overjoyed, jumped up like a child, spun her around in his arms, and shouted excitedly. She said yes. Cheers erupted as the man generously bought everyone in the bar a drink. Holding my glass, I couldn't help but let a tear fall. There had been no proposal when I got married. Ethan's father had been gravely ill, and his dying wish was to see the Carter and Jung families united. He had held my hand and said, "Jenna, I trust you to take care of Ethan. For his father's sake." Ethan had no choice but to marry me. Unfortunately, I had to handle every detail of the wedding myself. Ethan only showed up on the day to go through the motions, making it painfully clear to everyone that this marriage was forced upon him. It was his way of humiliating me, of showing me exactly how much he despised being tied to me. The proposal I had dreamed of countless times, the wedding I had envisioned over and over, ultimately became a one-person performance. Watching the passionate love in front of me now, how could I not feel envious? In the middle of the dance floor stood a Steinway piano, and a man wearing gold-rimmed glasses was playing a beautiful melody. I finished the champagne in my glass, adjusted my dress, and walked onto the stage. Leaning in slightly, I softly asked the pianist, "Can you play Summer by Joe Hisaishi?" The man nodded. I cleared my throat by the microphone and began to sing, my voice blending gently with the accompaniment. I heard that you're settled down, that you found a girl and you're married now. Never mind. I'll find someone like you. The song ended to a roar of applause. Roses were thrown onto the stage, filling it with splashes of red. The pianist stood up, walked toward me, and bowed slightly as he extended his hand. May I have the honor of inviting tonight's most charming lady for a dance? I tilted my head and gave him a good look. He wasn't bad looking. Since I'd already made up my mind to divorce Ethan Carter, why not? He'd been free to do whatever he pleased for 3 years. Why couldn't I indulge myself too? Plenty of couples in our circles led separate lives. Why should I remain faithful to a man who had never cared for me? Fueled by the alcohol coursing through me, I reached out my hand toward the man. Before I could take his hand, a cold and firm grip encircled my wrist. Ethan stepped in between us, blocking the man's intense gaze with his broad frame. "She's not available," he said curtly, then pulled me away without looking back. The tension in the car was palpable. I rubbed my wrist, glaring at him. "What are you doing here?" He let out a cold laugh. "Shouldn't I be asking you the same thing?" I turned to look at him. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and his clenched jaw made it clear he was angry. The tailored shirt he wore highlighted his perfect physique, and his chiseled profile was accentuated under the flickering streetlights. It wasn't surprising I had been utterly bewitched by this man in my previous life. Even his anger was mesmerizing, but none of that mattered. He didn't love me. No matter how I'd grown my hair long for him, learned the violin because he liked it, memorized his preferences, managed the house flawlessly, and been devoted to his parents. Love simply wasn't there. Love isn't something you can force. That moment, my motion sickness became unbearable, and it must have shown on my face. Yet Ethan didn't ask if I was okay, nor did he stop the car to let me rest. I remembered the way he used to speak to Lila Moore. His voice warm and his concern overflowing. When we finally arrived at the villa, I rushed to the bathroom and vomited. After washing my face and steadying myself, I came out to see Ethan lounging on the sofa, his eyes glued to his phone, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Ethan," called out, without even looking up. He replied dismissively, I took a deep breath. "Let's get a divorce." His attention finally shifted from his phone. He scoffed, his eyes narrowing as he sneered. "Really, Jenna? Another one of your games? Playing hard to get now." I met his piercing gaze, my voice calm and steady. "I'm serious. Instead of wasting each other's time in a loveless marriage, why don't we cut our losses?" Ethan's lips curled into a mocking smile, but there was a darkness in his eyes. "You were the one who insisted on marrying me, and now you're the one asking for a divorce. Do you think my family is a revolving door? Or have you set your sights on that pretty boy from the bar tonight? No wonder you didn't stay home waiting for me this year." He loosened his tie as he approached me, towering over me. He tilted my chin up with a single finger and smirked. "What's the matter? Feeling lonely at 30? Smack. I slapped him across the face. Ethan froze, his expression darkening as he quickly regained his composure. He grabbed my chin tightly, anger blazing in his eyes. "You dare hit me? I've already asked for a divorce. What don't I dare to do?" I snapped back, determined to break free from this endless torment. His face turned grim. "Why? Is it because I didn't celebrate your birthday with you? It's not like it's the first year I haven't. What's the big deal?" "You knew it was my birthday," I said, my voice trembling. "You've known every year that I wait for you at home, but you've never once come back. You're nothing more than the knot in my throat for a lifetime." "Ethan," I said, choking back my tears, "you've relied on the fact that I love you to treat me this way." Taking a deep breath, I forced the tears back and steadied my voice. "Now listen carefully. I don't love you anymore. I want a divorce." Something was off with Ethan Carter. Very off. Ever since I brought up divorce, the man who used to come home only once every 6 months was suddenly returning every few days. I couldn't help but ask him about it. "This is my house. Why wouldn't I come back?" he retorted, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. There was even one instance where he got drunk and got into a fight. One of his friends called me to intervene. To be clear, His group of rowdy friends had always acted like I didn't exist. When I arrived, to my surprise, they greeted me respectfully, addressing me as sister-in-law. The altercation had been with a group of trainees, who, as it turned out, had been betting on which actress would win Ethan's favor, and when I would finally be cast aside. In that moment, I understood why Ethan had been angry. He was likely preparing to settle down with Lila Moore, and didn't want anyone bringing up his past. Those people, however, had misunderstood. Why call me for this? I snapped. One of his friends scratched his head awkwardly. Well, sister-in-law, they were talking bad about you, so Ethan stepped in for you. Can you calm him down? We don't want this to get out of hand. I laughed coldly. First of all, you've got the wrong person. Second, they can say whatever they want. It doesn't bother me. Don't use me as an excuse. Lastly, what they're saying is true. With that, I turned and left. Behind me, Ethan's voice rang out, laced with anger. Who told you to call her? One of his friends mumbled. You were the one who said earlier that Jenna has always been and will always be Mrs. Carter. Get out of here, Ethan barked. A crash followed, and I turned back to see a glass bottle shattering on the ground. Ethan was staring at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't decipher. Since I had proposed divorce, I felt like I'd come alive again. I threw myself into organizing my assets and planning my life post-divorce. I came across an old list I'd written, 50 things to do with Ethan Carter. Pulling it out of a pile of old documents, I crossed out his name and began planning how to complete those items on my own. Just as I finished the third task, Ethan unexpectedly tossed an employment contract onto the table. Join the secretary's office at Carter Group, he said. I looked at him skeptically, wondering what kind of game he was playing. Still, since I'd been assessing his assets anyway, working at his company would give me better access. Ethan's expression was stiff, his tone cold. Don't overthink it. My mother suggested it. At the mention of his mother, a pang of regret hit me. In my previous life, my mother-in-law had been exceptionally kind to me, staunchly supporting me even when Ethan and Lila were trying to be together. She had been the second largest obstacle in their so-called love story. Even when Lila got pregnant, she had refused to let her into the Carter family. Thinking about it now, I felt a sense of loss. What a pity to lose such a wonderful mother-in-law. I happily started my new position, but on my second day, I ran into Ella-chan outside the building. Holding a cup of coffee, I pretended not to notice her and walked past, only for her to call out, Miss Jiang, can we talk? I stopped and looked at her. She clearly knew who I was if she could call me by name. I don't think we have anything to talk about, I said, waving her off. Miss Jiang, I want to propose a partnership, she said, her tone low. Mr. Carter has been bewitched by a shameless woman lately. This woman keeps setting me up, making him think I've been bullying her. Now he won't even see me. And what does this have to do with me? I asked flatly. Ella's voice sharpened. Even if I can't have Mr. Carter, I won't let that woman have him either. I think our goals are aligned. No, I interrupted, shaking my head. I don't care who he's with. He and I live our own separate lives. Before I could finish, I saw Ella's eyes widen in shock. Turning around, I was greeted by Ethan Carter's cold, expressionless face. You're blacklisted, he said flatly, tossing the words out like a casual remark before walking away. I turned back to Ella, who now seemed to have pieced something together. I've been tricked by that shameless woman again, she hissed. Miss Jiang, she continued. It was her who told me your identity. She did it to provoke me into confronting you. Mr. Carter was supposed to go on a business trip today, but I bet she lured him here too. The more Ella spoke, the more ridiculous it all sounded. Who exactly are you talking about? I asked, exasperated. Who else? That college girl, Lila Moore. Ella spat, her voice trembling with fury. I mulled over her words as I entered the office. I had kept a low profile since joining the company. While everyone knew I came from a wealthy background, they didn't know I was Mrs. Carter. They assumed I was just another rich girl killing time, and were naturally eager to stay on my good side. Gossiping was one way to bond with me. Today, however, the atmosphere in the office felt tense. Curious. I asked my desk mate, Chris, what was going on. He gestured with his chin toward the manager's office. The boss is tearing into the new intern. Following his gaze, I saw Ada, the department manager, sitting in the boss's chair, massaging her temples in frustration. Lila Moore, dressed in an innocent white dress, stood nearby, her eyes red and brimming with tears. Chris leaned in conspiratorially. You missed it yesterday, Jenna. The boss took her out personally, so you didn't get to see the drama. This intern's something else. Rumor has it she was brought in by the boss himself. No one knows what her background is. If she just kept her head down and didn't bother anyone, it wouldn't be so bad. But she keeps talking about being independent and self-reliant, pestering Ada for tasks every day. And she screws up every single one, leaving Ada to clean up after her. Today must be another screw-up. Just wait. She'll probably come out crying again. If you didn't know better, you'd think someone was bullying her. As Chris finished, the sound of papers being slammed onto the desk reverberated through the office. Why are you crying again? Ada's voice was sharp and irritated. Can you stop pulling this act every time? Have I ever bullied you? I told you this project was important, that you weren't ready for it, but you insisted on taking it, even dragging the boss into it. Now that you've messed it up, all you can do is cry. If you want to cry, save it for the boss. I'm done cleaning up after you. I really tried. I really worked hard. Lila sobbed, choking on her words. Tried? Worked hard? I told you from the start not to take on something you couldn't handle. You said you were serious, but you couldn't even do basic calculations correctly. You said you worked hard? Fine. Let me show you what real effort looks like. Ada suddenly raised her voice. Jenna, come in here. Bring the flowcharts you made. Startled, I grabbed my files and walked into the office. Chris gave me a sympathetic look, as if to say, good luck. Ada took my files and tossed them onto the desk in front of Lila. Lila Moore, take a look. This is what serious and hardworking actually look like. Jenna joined us just yesterday, and I gave her a project. Today, she's already mapped out the process for every similar case on the market. And you? All you do is cry. Ada's voice was sharp and cutting. Let me be clear. If this keeps happening, it's either you or me who's leaving. Lila's eyes reddened further as she glanced at me, a mix of embarrassment and surprise on her face. Miss Jiang, she stammered. Do you know each other? Ada raised an eyebrow. Perfect. If you know Jenna, then learn from her. This is what a competent employee looks like. When I left Ada's office, Lila caught up with me and insisted on taking me out for coffee. It was strange. Ever since I had helped her out before, she had been trying to get close to me. She was overly warm toward me, always finding excuses to chat. My repeated indifference and cold responses did little to deter her enthusiasm. While I understood that the events of the previous life weren't entirely her fault, I still didn't want any involvement with her. Yet, she was persistent, clinging to my sleeve as if refusing would make her burst into tears. Not wanting to become the center of attention, I reluctantly followed her to the cafe inside the building. This cafe was usually reserved for executives, and access required a key card. Lila Moore pulled out a black employee card to unlock the door. If I wasn't mistaken, that card belonged to Ethan Carter. We sat down, and I was still trying to figure out how to start when she preempted me. Jenna, I'm pregnant, she said, her tone confident. A flash of clarity struck me. Lila hadn't brought me here to discuss any issues. She wanted to confront me. She already knew Ethan was my husband. While I had been observing her, she had been quietly studying me in return, understanding her motives. I looked at her anew and finally noticed the shift in her demeanor. Her gaze no longer avoided mine. She had gained confidence, likely because she had Ethan Carter, the man who could solve all her problems, wrapped around her finger. I let out a cold laugh. So, is this your way of bragging to me that you're pregnant? As his mistress? Jenna, don't say it so harshly, Lila replied, brushing away her tears. A smug expression crept onto her face as she placed her hand on her stomach. I'm only telling you this for your own good. You're capable and come from a good family. Leaving a man who doesn't love you means you can find someone better. Besides, Ethan and our baby deserve a complete family. And let's be honest, Ethan never loved you. How can I be the other woman when you're the one he never loved? The unloved one is the real outsider in this relationship. Her words made me reconsider everything that had happened in my previous life. Perhaps my misfortune hadn't been as simple as I thought. Lila wasn't some innocent flower. She had her own schemes. Thank you for showing me how much variety there is among people, I said with a sardonic smile. To fall for someone as shameless and foolish as you? I almost feel sorry for Ethan's taste. With that, I stood up, unwilling to waste any more time on her. Lila grabbed my arm, her voice trembling with sobs. Jenna, please don't be angry. It's all my fault. As she tugged at me, she suddenly stumbled and fell backward to the floor. Lila. Ethan's voice rang out. I turned to see him striding toward us, his face a storm of fury. He swept Lila into his arms, glaring at me. Jenna, what did you do to her? His accusatory tone was all too familiar. Memories of our countless arguments from my past life surfaced, each one starting with Ethan's harsh demands. Did you spread the rumors online calling Lila a homewrecker? Did you go to her school and cause a scene? What did you tell my mother to make her so prejudiced against Lila? I'm telling you now, no matter what you say or do, it won't change how I feel about Lila. It'll only make me despise you more. Back then, I had done nothing. But now I couldn't help but suspect Lila had orchestrated everything herself. Taking a deep breath, I looked at her calmly. Why don't you tell him what exactly I did to you? Clutching her stomach, Lila whimpered. Ethan, my stomach hurts so much. I'm scared. Ethan shot me a venomous glare. Jenna, if anything happens to Lila. Before he could finish, Lila let out another weak cry. Ethan's expression darkened further, and he carried her swiftly toward the elevator. I stood there, taking deep breaths to calm myself. What on earth was this mess? On the way home, I received a message from Lila. Jenna, I'm okay now, but Ethan insists on staying at the hospital to take care of me. I told him to go home, but he wouldn't listen. Attached was a photo of Ethan peeling an apple for her, his head lowered in concentration. Disgusted, I tossed my phone aside but couldn't resist picking it up again to send Ethan a message. When are we finalizing the divorce? By the time I got home, I had cooled off a bit. If it weren't for the need to sort out our assets, I would have moved out long ago. Taking advantage of Ethan's absence, I went into his study and powered on his computer. I had observed for a long time and knew Ethan's computer password was his birthday. Without hesitation, I copied all the files over to a flash drive. I would sort through them later. Once that was done, I picked up a suitcase and began packing. While going through my things, I came across a surprising number of old items. Photos taken by various guests on our wedding day. Letters I had written to Ethan. Cookbooks I had bought to learn how to make his favorite dishes. And countless other remnants of a love that no longer existed. Keeping these things around would only add to my frustration. I gathered them into a pile and burned them all. I packed up my valuables and left a divorce agreement on his desk. I only requested the properties and shares that had been part of my dowry, seeking a clean and swift end to this miserable marriage. If Ethan had any sense, he would sign without issue. If not, I had prepared backup plans. As I stepped out of the car, my phone rang. Ethan's voice came through, sharp and accusatory. Jenna, what did you say to my mother? Here we go again. I frowned, but this time I remained calm. I didn't say anything. Then why would my mom go to Lila and cause a scene? Lila was so upset she fell unconscious. She's seriously ill now. If anything happens to her, what does that have to do with me? I cut him off and ended the call. Under my breath, I muttered a curse. After moving into my new place, I went out for dinner. Just as I stepped out of the residential area, I heard someone call my name. Jenna. I turned to look, but before I could react, a cloth was pressed over my mouth, and I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself tied up in an abandoned warehouse, the rope so tight that I couldn't move. I could hear footsteps approaching, so I quickly shut my eyes and pretended to be unconscious. Brother Lynn, do you really think that Carter guy will back down for this woman? Lila said he would. Another voice replied. She wouldn't lie to me. Just go. Leave the rest to me. I'll make sure this stays under control. Listening to their conversation, I suddenly remembered an incident from my previous life. Carter Corporation had acquired an old textile factory to transform it into a modern automated production facility. The renovation meant that at least half of the factory's workers would lose their jobs. Lila's adoptive father had worked there his entire life, and the workers were unwilling to leave. They organized a group to block the factory's redevelopment. The standoff had been tense until Ethan discovered that one of the leaders was Lila's adoptive father. Not only did he offer generous severance packages, but he also helped those unwilling to leave find new jobs. Everyone praised Lila for having such a good daughter. It was said that after this incident, Lila, who had always been ambivalent, became entirely devoted to Ethan. The man speaking now was undoubtedly Lila's adoptive father. Before long, the other men left, and only Lila's adoptive father remained. A bucket of cold water was thrown on my face, forcing me to wake up, holding a wooden club in his hand. He stared at me darkly. "Transfer me $200,000. I spat out the dirty water from my mouth. "I don't have that kind of money." Bang! The club came down hard, and I thought I might die. As he raised the club again, I shouted, "Wait! Untie me first. I can unlock my phone with my fingerprint." He hesitated for a moment, then seemed to decide that I couldn't escape and untied me. I picked up my phone. "I can only transfer 10,000 at a time. There's a limit," I said, stalling as I began transferring small amounts one by one. While doing so, I spoke. "I know why you kidnapped me. It's about the factory, right? You didn't need to go this far. Ethan is obsessed with your daughter. If he knew you were Lila's father, he'd definitely back down. You didn't have to take this risk." Just then, his phone rang. "Brother Lynn, the Carter guy says as long as the hostage is safe, he'll agree to our terms." Lila's adoptive father paused before replying. "Fine." Not long after, the phone rang again. This time, his expression softened. He spoke gently into the phone. "Don't worry, Lila. I have her here. Everything will be fine." I knew it. This was all my idea. Lila's adoptive father said, his voice trembling. "It has nothing to do with her. I won't let anyone ruin her happiness." His sudden agitation made my heart sink. No wonder he wanted me to transfer money. He planned to kill me and flee. In my past life, I had researched Lila Moore's background. Her biological parents had divorced, and her current father was her adoptive one. People often remarked that her adoptive father doted on her more than any biological parent ever could. Seeing the madness in his eyes now, an unsettling suspicion arose in my mind. While he had been on the phone earlier, I had managed to send my location to several contacts. All I needed was to stall for a little more time. But there wasn't enough time. Lila's adoptive father threw his phone aside, picked up the wooden club again, and started toward me. "It's all because of you. Lila wouldn't be suffering like this if it weren't for you. She loves Ethan Carter so much, but he refuses to divorce you. If you're dead, she can marry him and finally be happy." The next blow landed. Pain surging through my body, I closed my eyes, despair washing over me. Just before I lost consciousness, I thought I heard Ethan's voice. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. Ethan was sitting beside me, disheveled, his face unshaven and tired. The moment I moved, his eyes opened, and he grasped my hand, his voice filled with relief. "Jenna, you're awake. How do you feel?" "It hurts," I whispered weakly. "Where does it hurt?" "I'll call the doctor," he said urgently. "All right." Ethan left the room, and shortly after, Lila entered, wheeling herself in. I tensed, eyeing her warily. "What do you want?" Tears streaked down her face. "Jenna, I'm begging you. My father didn't mean it. Please, forgive him." I nodded slowly. "I know he didn't mean it. The one who planned this was you." Lila's expression froze, then crumbled into a pained, innocent look. "Jenna, what are you talking about? I've been in the hospital all this time trying to protect my pregnancy. Don't bother pretending anymore," I said coldly. "Getting close to Ethan Carter was your plan all along, wasn't it? Why would a university student like you stoop so low to become a mistress? You don't know anything." Lila snapped, gripping the arms of her wheelchair tightly. "I've loved him for a long time," she finally admitted. It turned out that Lila had an older sister, Heather, who had followed their father after their parents' divorce. Heather had been Ethan's ex-girlfriend, and the two sisters had remained in contact. Heather had shared every detail of her relationship with Ethan with Lila. But Ethan's family couldn't accept Heather's background and forced him to break up with her. Around the same time, Ethan's father fell gravely ill, and fate led to our marriage. Unable to cope with the heartbreak, Heather had taken her own life. "You have no idea," Lila said, her voice trembling. "When I first saw Ethan's picture, I fell in love with him. To honor my sister, I changed my name to Lila Moore. I endured the disgusting advances of my adoptive father just to get money for violin lessons. The instrument Heather excelled at. I copied everything about her, perfecting my act so that when I met Ethan, he would notice me immediately." She sneered, her eyes filled with contempt. "And you, Jenna? You're nothing but a placeholder wife, riding on your family's wealth and connections. If you're smart, you'll step aside. Maybe then I'll show mercy and let Ethan give you a little more in the divorce settlement." Lila wheeled closer to me, her smile smug. "If you're smart, you'll realize you can't beat me. You can't win against someone who's already dead." Suddenly, she raised her voice. "Jenna, I'm begging you. My father's a good man. He didn't mean to hurt you." Then, as if on cue, she tried to stand but collapsed heavily to the floor. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the pristine hospital floor. Ethan and several doctors rushed in at the same time. Lila clutched Ethan's hand, her voice faint and trembling. "Ethan, please, ask Jenna to forgive my father. Please save him." Ethan, clearly panicked, helped the medical team rush her into the emergency room. By the afternoon, Ethan returned to my room. His face was grim, his usual confidence shaken. Ethan spoke quietly. "Lila had a miscarriage. And what does that have to do with me?" I snapped, barely containing my anger. "Do you think I caused it? Both times. You were there. Ethan, if you dare pin this on me, I swear you'll regret it." He stayed silent for a long moment, then suddenly said, "Can't you let her father off the hook?" I raised an eyebrow and cut him off. Ethan turned his head, avoiding my gaze, and gave a small nod. "No way," I replied with a cold laugh. "Not only will I press charges against her father, but if you don't sign the divorce papers today, I'll take you to court too." "Why?" he asked, his voice heavy with confusion. "Why?" I echoed, almost laughing at his audacity. "Because you've trampled all over my dignity. When I agreed to this marriage, I didn't know anything about Heather. It was your weakness and her extreme actions that led to your tragedy. And yet you shifted all your hatred onto me, an innocent bystander. You've tortured me emotionally for 6 years, using my love for you as a weapon. Am I not a victim in all of this? Now you're accusing me of causing a miscarriage and asking me to forgive the person who hurt me? Ethan, the biggest mistake of my life was marrying you, but I've learned my lesson. Now it's time to fix it." "Enough, Jenna," Ethan shouted, cutting me off. Then, like a deflated balloon, he sank onto the sofa, covering his face with his hands. "I'm sorry," he murmured. I froze. Never in this lifetime, or the previous one, had I heard Ethan Carter apologize to me. "I realized my feelings for you a long time ago," he admitted, his voice strained. "But every time I felt something for you, I was overwhelmed with guilt, like I was betraying Heather. She gave her life to prove her love for me. So every time I felt drawn to you, I pushed you away with coldness, trying to suppress it. It was my cowardice that made me blame you for her death. And when Lila showed up, looking so much like Heather, I thought it was her, coming back to me. That's why I couldn't help myself. When I saw the divorce papers you left, I felt my entire world collapse. The love I tried to suppress surged forward, drowning me. Jenna, I've fallen in love with you." He paused, his voice breaking. "I only feel guilt for Lila. Even when the doctor told me she miscarried, a small part of me felt relieved. Lila has chronic kidney disease, and the miscarriage caused severe complications. She needs a kidney transplant, or she won't live long. I failed her sister. I can't let her die too. Please, Jenna, just give me some time. Let me take care of this, and then we can start over." "Ethan," I said, massaging my temples, exhaustion setting in. "You're too greedy. This marriage is over. If you won't sign the papers, expect a court summons. I won't divorce you, Jenna, he said firmly. It didn't take long to figure out why Ethan was so confident. He terminated all collaborative projects between Carter Corporation and my family's business. I was in the middle of completing my discharge paperwork when my father called, his voice tinged with anxiety. Jenna, have you and Ethan been fighting? He just called off all our joint projects. I hadn't expected history to repeat itself. In my past life, Ethan had done this because I refused to divorce him. This time, it was because he wouldn't let me go. I understood my father's worry. Ethan's scorched earth tactics had nearly ruined the Jung family in the previous life, forcing us to sell off shares to recover. All right, Ethan, I muttered to myself. This time, you'll know what it feels like to lose everything. When we got married, his family gave me a 10% share in Carter Corporation as part of my dowry. It was time to put that to use. After leaving the hospital, I walked through the small garden and unexpectedly spotted Lila and her adoptive father. Lila sat in a wheelchair, looking pale, while her father stood beside her with an obsequious expression, his eyes filled with suppressed fervor. I told you not to come looking for me, Lila scolded him. Do you know how much Ethan spent to get you out on bail? I was worried about you, he said cautiously. I just wanted to check on you. Well, now you've seen me, Lila snapped. Ethan is taking great care of me. Get out of here. Now. Lila's adoptive father reached out toward her, but she shoved him away in disgust. Don't touch me, you creep. Don't think I don't know your filthy thoughts, she spat venomously. If you were so desperate, why didn't you just assault Jenna? She's the one who caused my miscarriage and killed your grandchild. Lila, he stammered, his voice trembling. Was it really her? Or did you do it yourself? It was her, Lila hissed, her voice low but seething with anger. She thought I was carrying Ethan's child. If you have the guts, go kill her. I covered my mouth in shock, trembling as I stopped the recording on my phone and slipped away unnoticed. Instead of returning to the company, I arranged private meetings with board members who had conflicts with Ethan. My goal was to turn them into allies, promising them greater benefits and influence if they supported my cause. When my father learned of my plans, he gave me his full backing. He'd always encouraged me to focus on my career, but I had foolishly ignored him after my marriage. Now, looking at his graying hair, I realized I needed to step up and ensure he could enjoy his later years in peace. Late that night, after finishing work, I parked my car and was walking toward my apartment when a shadow lunged at me. A glinting blade slashed through the air, aiming for my body. 2 bodyguards, stationed nearby, stepped in immediately. They subdued the attacker, forcing him to the ground. Shaken, I yanked off his mask. As I had suspected, it was Lila's adoptive father. The sound of police sirens filled the air outside. I smirked. The timing was perfect. The next morning, a shareholder representative filed a formal motion, accusing Ethan Carter of overpaying for the textile factory acquisition and suggesting embezzlement. A report was sent to the relevant authorities. Carter Corporation's stock price plummeted, and my carefully prepared short sell fund made a massive profit. The media wasted no time, publishing salacious headlines about Ethan's alleged misconduct. Reports surfaced that he fabricated evidence to protect his lover's father. Investigations into Lila Moore's background followed, unearthing shocking revelations. As it turned out, Heather's death wasn't a suicide. My investigation had unexpectedly led me to Ella, who had fallen on hard times since being blacklisted. Desperate, she handed me a complete set of evidence. Miss Jung, she said, this time, our goals align perfectly. The evidence was old, and much of it wouldn't hold up in court, but it was more than enough to sway public opinion. While I released the information to online news outlets, I took the most damning pieces directly to Ethan. Lila was lying in a hospital bed, about to be wheeled into surgery within the hour. When she saw me, her face went pale, and she clung tightly to Ethan's hand. It's okay, Ethan reassured her, patting her hand gently. Focus on the surgery. Everything will be fine. Before the surgery, I said coolly, how about I tell you a story? I don't want to hear anything, Lila screamed, her voice trembling with panic. Fine. Don't listen. Then, I replied calmly. Ethan turned to me, his tone pleading. Jenna, please, don't agitate her. This is a life or death situation. Can't this wait until after the surgery? I'm afraid not, I said with a cold smile. After all, I want her to know what it feels like to have hope ripped away. Jenna, Ethan shouted, trying to stop me, but I ignored him. I played the recording on my phone. If you were so desperate, why didn't you just assault Jenna? She's the one who caused my miscarriage and killed your grandchild. It was her. She thought I was carrying Ethan's child. If you have the guts, go kill her. Lila's face turned ashen. She hadn't expected me to record her. Panicking, she threw herself into Ethan's arms. Ethan, it's not true, she cried, her voice trembling. That's all fake. It's edited. You have to believe me. Ethan's face darkened, his eyes stormy with rage. A dangerous energy radiated from him. Do you know how Heather died? I asked, my voice low and cold. She didn't commit suicide. She was killed by her loving little sister. I threw a stack of documents onto Ethan's desk. Mr. Carter, don't look, Lila screamed, rushing forward to snatch the documents and tear them to shreds. Shred them? I've got more copies, I said with a calm smile. Ethan wasn't stupid. Seeing Lila's panicked reaction, he knew I wasn't lying. It was almost laughable. The person he had cherished and protected was the very one who had killed his pure love. He stared at her, his gaze cold and piercing. In the next second, he grabbed her by the throat. Lila Moore. How dare you, he growled. Seeing Lila gasping for breath, I finally motioned for the bodyguards to pull him away. Are you still going to save her? I asked coldly. No. I wish she were dead, Ethan yelled, his fury uncontainable. Well, that's easy enough. Why get your hands dirty? Call the hospital now and donate your kidney, I suggested mockingly. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. No, Mr. Carter. Lila clung to him, desperation and disbelief filling her eyes. Please don't. Ethan kicked her away without a second thought. I crouched down to look her in the eye. How does it feel to lose hope? Does it hurt? I'll also release that recording online. Even if you die, you'll carry the weight of your crimes and die under the condemnation of the public. No, Lila cried out, a guttural sound of despair. There's one more thing you might not know, I added, my voice steady. I filed for divorce long ago. Ethan refused to sign. He loved your sister. And later, he loved me. He never loved you. Lila clutched her chest, her lips trembling, her breath shallow. I straightened up and walked away. Ethan called out to me, but I didn't look back. Lila's death came sooner than I expected. She didn't die from her illness but was murdered by her own mother. Her mother had stumbled upon Ella's online expose and discovered that Lila was the one who had killed Heather. She confronted Lila, demanding to know why she had hurt her sister. Lila had replied, venom in her voice, because I couldn't stand it. Why did she get to live with Dad and have a normal life, a perfect boyfriend, while I had to live under your control, surviving on scraps? And you? You turned a blind eye. Didn't I tell you how terrifying Lin Guoxing's gaze was? Didn't I beg for your help? And what did you say? You mocked me for being young and scheming. I lived every day in fear of that man. When he held me, when he pretended to kiss me goodnight, when he wiped the sweat off my forehead in the summer. You knew, but you refused to admit it. You thought ignoring it would make it go away. You're a failure, a terrible mother. If I could choose, I'd have killed you instead. Enraged, Lila's mother lashed out, cutting her artery with a fruit knife in a moment of fury. Though doctors intervened quickly, Lila's late-stage kidney disease and weak will to live sealed her fate. She didn't survive. Her mother, now mentally unstable, confessed everything to the police in a series of incoherent statements, piecing together the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan learned that I had shorted Carter Corporation stock and then bought shares at a low price, becoming the largest shareholder. When I filed for divorce, he fell into severe depression. Ethan's mother pleaded with me several times to visit him. After much hesitation, I agreed. When I saw him, I barely recognized him. He was gaunt, lifeless, a shadow of the man he once was. He lay on the bed, his eyes vacant, only perking up slightly when he saw me. I said a few perfunctory words out of respect for his mother, then prepared to leave. "Jenna," Ethan called out suddenly, his voice fragile. "If I died, would you remember me?" I turned back and replied seriously, "No. Don't try to use death to burden me with guilt. Choosing to die and escape reality is your decision, and it has nothing to do with me. If you die, I'll forget you soon enough. I'll have a new life, a new lover, and I won't repeat your mistakes by punishing my future partner for my past. So, you should try to live. Maybe, years from now, we can meet again and smile at each other as strangers." Ethan covered his face with his hands and cried like a child. Sunlight streamed into the room. I glanced up at the bright sky. Today was a sunny day. Tomorrow would be, too. The day after that as well. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video. In my previous life, he married me because of his mentor's insistence, but I was utterly indifferent to him. It wasn't until he was killed by his competitor that I found the love letters he had written to me among his belongings. Every word was filled with the pain of loving someone he couldn't have. When I opened my eyes, I had returned to 3 years ago, the year we had just gotten married. I barged into his room and saw his injured arm. With reddened eyes, I asked, "Ethan, does it hurt?" He froze for a moment, then resignedly closed his eyes and said sharply, "Why are you here to rub salt into my wounds again? In my previous life, until my death, Ethan's love letters had been mocked online. His competitor not only took over his business empire, but also publicly humiliated him as a man unloved by anyone. To defend him, I got into a car accident on my way to a TV station and died tragically. In my final moments, my last wish was that Ethan would never meet me in his next life. When I woke up from the darkness, the lingering pain was still there. Faintly, I heard congratulations around me. Mr. Carter, Miss Warren, happy first wedding anniversary. Ethan and I, 1 year married." I lifted my eyes, but the piercing white light forced them shut. After a moment of ringing in my ears, I realized I was in the middle of a banquet. The atmosphere was lively with clinking glasses and mingling voices. Ethan, looking much younger, sat coldly beside me. His injured hand dripped blood along his pale fingers. The dining knife had fallen to the ground, and a waiter was nervously apologizing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I didn't hold it properly." A wave of sorrow surged in my heart, and I couldn't stop myself from calling out his name. "Ethan." Across the room, a familiar face smirked knowingly. "Miss Warren, I stood up for you. How are you going to thank me?" It was William Song, Ethan's competitor and the man responsible for his death in my previous life. My body trembled as memories of this day came flooding back. At this very banquet celebrating our first anniversary, I had argued with Ethan and cruelly said, "Talking to you makes me feel like a dog." During dinner, William deliberately had someone injure Ethan's right hand. Out of politeness, I coldly told the waiter, "I hate blood. Please clean it up." That single sentence made Ethan misunderstand me deeply. He simply wiped the blood off the table in front of me and endured the pain, continuing his negotiations. The untreated wound left his once pristine hand permanently damaged. From then on, it ached during rainy weather and eventually became the weakness that cost him his life. Watching Ethan now, expressionless as he used a napkin to wipe away the blood in front of me, my heart twisted painfully. Without thinking, I pushed his arm aside and abruptly stood up, shouting, "William Song, care to explain yourself?" My outburst stunned everyone. The room fell silent. Ethan froze, his dark eyes narrowing as they shifted to me. A trace of pain flickered across his face before he quickly masked it with indifference. Closing his eyes, he said, "Vivian, there's no need. If you think I'm dirty, I'll go change." Wait, he thought I found him dirty? I quickly grabbed his sleeve, abandoning all the pride I had clung to in my previous life. Under his confused gaze, I angrily picked up a glass of water and hurled it at William. "Apologize to my husband." The entire room fell silent. Standing protectively in front of Ethan, I glared at William. Beneath my palm, Ethan's wrist trembled slightly from the pain. "Tonight, He had injured himself trying to close a deal because I once said before our marriage, "I want a stable life." William's smirk faded as he wiped the water off his shoulder, his expression darkening. "Miss Warren, didn't you hate Ethan the most? What's with the sudden act?" The warmth of Ethan's wrist beneath my palm felt real, anchoring me. Without even looking at him, I wrapped a napkin around his wound and said, "This is just between me and my husband. You wouldn't understand." William's face darkened further. In that instant, I remembered the vile things he said about Ethan after his death in my previous life. Rage overcame me, and I began throwing everything within reach at him. Minutes later, William stood there drenched, soup dripping off his head, his face visibly scratched. Pulling Ethan out of the hotel, I stepped into the light drizzle. The spring rain fell quietly, the world around us peaceful. I was still overwhelmed with the joy of being reborn when Ethan suddenly pulled his hand out of mine. His voice was sharp. "Enough. There's no one around." I turned to meet his cold, beautiful eyes, momentarily lost in their depth. It was hard to believe this was the same man secretly writing me love letters. Avoiding my gaze, Ethan said flatly, "I still have a meeting. You should go home." Standing in the soft drizzle, his delicate and striking features were partially hidden in the shadows, worn down and dimmed. The blood smeared on the corner of his lips and his jawline gave him a tragic yet fragile beauty. As I held his hand, my eyes reddened uncontrollably. When I spoke, my voice carried a trace of a sob. "Ethan, I won't argue with you anymore. Your hand is injured. Let's go to the hospital." "All right." He sharply lifted his eyes, staring at me in disbelief. A flicker of struggle flashed in his gaze before it was quickly replaced with indifference. With a cold chuckle, he said, "What are you planning this time? Another way to torment me? Want to sprinkle salt on my wounds?" In my past life, I wasn't kind to Ethan. He was calm and reserved, distant by nature. Our marriage had been arranged by his mentor, and I assumed he must have resented me. Over the years, we became nothing more than a pair of resentful strangers. It wasn't until his death that I realized my feelings for him had sunk deep into my bones. The night breeze made my head spin, and I couldn't hold back anymore. Grasping his arm, I sobbed loudly, "Ethan, please don't die." "Okay." The man who had always been so cold to me suddenly froze, his expression stiff. For a fleeting moment, the stillness in his eyes melted. In the end, he postponed his meeting. "Fine. I'll go," he said, his voice resigned. At the hospital, Ethan stayed silent while the doctor treated his wound. The entire time, I was nervously asking the doctor if the injury would leave permanent damage. My emotions spiraled out of control as I spoke, collapsing into tears repeatedly. After all, in my previous life, Ethan's death left me running around trying to defend his reputation, enduring countless sneers and humiliation. Those memories left scars I couldn't erase. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the side of my face throughout the treatment, as if trying to figure out what I was thinking. Once the doctor finished cleaning his wound and removed his gloves, he turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, your injury isn't serious, but your wife seems quite shaken." Ethan's expression stiffened, and he murmured apologetically, "I'm sorry. It's my fault. I keep arguing with her." The doctor chuckled knowingly. "Ease up on her a little. She seems pretty attached to you." Ethan's hand moved slightly, covering the faint bite mark I'd left during our earlier argument. "Is it gone?" he asked the doctor flatly. "Yes. It's fine," the doctor replied. By the time we left the hospital, my eyes were swollen from crying. I clung tightly to Ethan's bandaged hand, refusing to let go. When his assistant stopped the car in front of us, he hesitated. "Mr. Carter, about tonight's meeting." It was already late at night, and with such a grueling work schedule, it was no wonder Ethan eventually fell ill in my past life. Instinctively, I moved closer to Ethan, clutching his arm like a frightened child. "I'm scared to sleep alone," I whispered. His face froze for a moment, and his dark eyes turned unreadable. "Vivian, do you even know what you're saying?" he asked, his voice cold. Before today, I'd never dared to approach him like this, let alone act so clingy. But now, I buried my head against his chest, silently vowing not to let go until he agreed to come home with me. In the end, Ethan gave in. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly into the quiet villa district. The familiar sight of the house slowly calmed my anxious heart. Ethan was alive. We were home. Holding his warm hand tightly, I began to plan how to warn him about the people he needed to be cautious of. Just as we reached the doorway, someone suddenly called out to me. "Vivian, didn't you promise to celebrate my birthday with me?" Standing under the street lamp, a man's tear mole caught the light, emphasizing his striking features. His handsome face, always carrying a hint of charm, now held a trace of disappointment. It was Ryan, my childhood friend, the only person who stayed by my side in my past life until the end. In that moment, I remembered the promise I'd made to meet him earlier tonight. A promise I'd delayed because of Ethan's injury. The second Ethan saw Ryan, his entire body stiffened, and he released my hand with a cold detachment. My heart sank. He had misunderstood again. In my past life, I'd read Ethan's love letters, so I knew he had always believed I had feelings for Ryan. I wanted to explain, but Ethan avoided my touch, his rejection cutting deeper than words ever could. Ethan glanced at me briefly and said coldly, "I still have a meeting. Go home first." Without waiting for me to catch up, he turned and left. Before I could follow, Ryan grabbed my arm gently. "Vivian," he said softly, "the cake is ready. Come with me." Watching Ethan's figure disappear into the distance, my anxiety flared up. "Ryan, it's not even your birthday today. What are you doing?" His smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "I just can't stand how cold he is to you. What's wrong with you today?" I didn't have the patience to explain. Extending my hand, I asked, "Where's the information I asked for?" Ryan's expression dimmed slightly. "Ethan doesn't even appreciate it. Why are you still helping him?" In my previous life, I was terrified Ethan would suffer in business. I had asked Ryan to investigate William's song and secretly placed the information under Ethan's pillow. Ethan likely never read it, and in the end, he was betrayed and lost everything. This time, I would hand it to him personally. Reluctantly, Ryan handed over the folder but suddenly grabbed my hand. "Vivian," he said with a faint smile, "my stomach hurts tonight. Can't you stay with me?" His words were exactly the same as in my past life. Back then, I had been so frightened by his pale complexion that I rushed him to the hospital, only to have the doctor tell me he was just hungry and needed a meal. This time, I pulled my hand back and said firmly, "Find somewhere to eat. I have something important to do." Without waiting for a response, I hurried back home. I expected at least one light to be on in the house, but the villa was shrouded in darkness. Only a faint glow seeped from the study. Guided by memory, I approached the doorway and saw Ethan's silhouette. He wasn't at a meeting but was sitting by the desk, writing something. His posture seemed weary, and the bandages on his hand were faintly stained with blood. Yet he didn't seem to notice. My heart clenched painfully. Pushing the door open, I asked sharply, "Ethan, what are you doing?" He froze, startled, and looked up to see me. I rushed forward, snatching the pen from his hand. "Are you trying to ruin your hand completely?" I scolded. He seemed surprised that I had come back. After a brief moment of hesitation, he covered the paper he had been writing on, his expression unreadable. He stayed silent, staring at me. My temper flared. "Ethan, are you out of your mind? Did you forget what the doctor said? Which is more important, your hand or your work? Do my words mean nothing to you?" After my barrage of questions, a rare expression of blankness crossed his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd come back." His apology caught me off guard, silencing my anger. Did he think I'd stay with Ryan instead? My heart softened as I carefully unwrapped his bandage and replaced it with a clean one. "There's nothing between me and Ryan," I said softly. "Ethan, the person I like is you." The air around us seemed to still. His breathing grew faint, and his gaze deepened. Once I finished tending his wound, he picked up the leftover bandages and walked out. As though trying to escape, I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. My voice trembled as I confessed. "Ethan, I said I like you." The night was quiet, the darkness thick around us. Ethan's dark eyes seemed bottomless. His voice was hoarse as he said, "Vivian, let's stop this for tonight. If you've had enough of this act, go to sleep." He didn't believe me. Feeling desperate, I pulled out the folder Ryan had given me and handed it to him. This is William Song's information. I want you to beat him. Ethan's gaze landed on the thick folder. A trace of bitter self-mockery flickered in his eyes. Yet the response I anticipated never came. I grabbed his sleeve, my voice filled with frustration. Why don't you believe me? Do I have to use some drastic measure to get you to admit how you feel? Biting my lip, my cheeks flushed as I reached for the ties of my dress. Trembling, I leaned into him. I'm serious about you. In the darkness, Ethan's body went rigid, his presence suddenly emanating a sharp and oppressive energy. His large hand pressed against my waist, and with the faint sound of fabric tearing, I felt a chill as my dress slipped from my shoulders. Before I could react, he pushed me onto the couch. His eyes burned with an intense, unfathomable darkness. His fingers gripped my chin tightly as he leaned closer, his voice low and rough. Vivian. For him, I was even willing to go this far. Ethan seemed angry. Tears welled up in my eyes. Ethan. It hurts. He let out a cold laugh, his voice devoid of warmth. If you dare lie to me, then you deserve the pain. My whole body trembled as I clung tightly to his shirt. I'm not lying. Ethan, visibly infuriated, pressed his rough hand against my slender neck, his voice sharp and deliberate. That folder is entirely fake. What's your plan? You want me to follow it and die at William Song's hands? So you and Ryan can live happily ever after? I was stunned by his words. What are you talking about? He sneered. Ryan is William Song's half-brother. You've always known that, haven't you? My eyes widened in disbelief. I swear on everything, I hadn't known that in my past life. Only now, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. My face turned pale as realization hit me. In my previous life, Ethan's death wasn't just because of William Song's schemes. Part of it was because he thought I wanted him dead. Tears streamed down my face as I ignored Ethan's fury and hugged him tightly. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry. He let out a mocking laugh. Enough. Stop this charade, before I lose control. Leave me. I clung to his shirt, my knuckles turning white. I'm not leaving. I told you. I'll never leave you. The tension in the room thickened like the calm before a storm. Ethan's gaze was filled with a mix of hatred and despair, as if he wanted nothing more than to destroy me in that moment. You think I can't do anything to you, don't you? I looked back at him silently, meeting his gaze. In his dark eyes, I saw a growing obsession and madness. My body shivered, but I refused to back down. Instead, I wrapped my arms around his neck and whispered softly, "It's too cold. Let's go to the bedroom." Okay. The next moment, Ethan flipped me over and pressed me down on the sofa. His scorching body trapped me in the small corner, overwhelming my senses. His cold, sharp voice cut through the air. Vivian, you started this. If you try to escape now, I will kill you with my own hands. I had never seen this side of Ethan before, so completely out of control. It felt like I was drowning in a fiery ocean, clinging desperately to a lifeline while fear and tension consumed me. The night deepened. Ethan's large, calloused hand intertwined with mine, his grip so tight it felt like my fragile bones would snap. His voice was hoarse as he said, "Vivian, you don't have a choice anymore." My cries turned into broken sobs, but the night's relentless intensity turned my protests into silent pleas. The wind stirred the curtains, and outside, the stars shimmered faintly. At some point, a meteor streaked across the sky, leaving a dazzling trail. I stared helplessly at the moon outside, tears streaming down my face as I begged for mercy. But Ethan only responded with harsher punishment. "Bad women must pay the price," he muttered. The next morning, when I finally woke up, my legs were weak, and the bed beside me was empty. The chaotic mess of the night before had been meticulously cleaned, leaving no trace of what had happened, as if it had all been a dream. I picked up my phone and noticed several missed calls, all from Ryan. They were made late at night, and I hadn't heard them. He had even sent me a text. "I received your ticket. I told you. Your VIP seats will always belong to me." Looking at the calendar, I suddenly remembered I was hosting a violin concert next week. I had sent the only central VIP ticket to Ryan because, at the time, I thought Ethan wouldn't come. Panic surged in my chest as I scrolled through my messages. But Ethan hadn't sent me anything. Did he know? I called Ethan, but his secretary answered. Miss Warren, Mr. Carter is in a meeting and can't take your call right now. Frustrated, I snapped. Fine. Tell Mr. Carter that I'm not feeling well. The line went silent for a moment. And then Ethan's cold, intimidating voice came through. What's wrong? Curling up on the bed, I let out a soft whimper. I fell when I got out of bed earlier. My legs are too weak to stand properly. The call ended abruptly, the cold beep ringing in my ears. He was definitely furious. Even acting coy wasn't going to work on him this time. I calmed myself for a while, then casually grabbed one of Ethan's shirts and wandered downstairs to the living room. I called Ryan back, and he answered immediately. Vivian, he said with a chuckle. Why didn't you answer my calls last night? Fingering a photo of the two of us on the shelf, I asked. We're best friends. Right. Ryan's laughter came through the phone. Of course. Don't you remember? Back in the orphanage, you dreamed of becoming a violinist, and I wanted to be a superstar. We promised we'd always be together. Hearing those words now left me feeling strangely unsettled. Had I ever really seen Ryan for who he was all these years? In my previous life, Ryan had helped me sort through Ethan's belongings after his death. Among them were those love letters, which only the two of us had seen. Yet they somehow ended up being leaked to the public. I thought it was due to the relentless paparazzi, but now, I wasn't so sure. Ryan was still talking. Did you get the gift I sent you? I glanced at the pile of gift boxes stacked in the corner. I hadn't opened it yet. It had arrived a few days ago. A large plush toy. As I vaguely recalled, on stormy nights when Ethan wasn't around, I had clung to toys like that to get through the darkness. I mumbled a few non-committal words to Ryan, then walked over to the box and opened it. Inside was a large, fluffy white bear with glossy black eyes that looked adorably innocent. In my previous life, this bear had been my companion for a long time, yet now it filled me with unease. I decided to put it away and started dragging it toward the storage room. Before I could, the door suddenly opened. Standing there was Ethan, who had unexpectedly returned home. I froze, wearing only his oversized shirt, awkwardly dragging the plush bear behind me. Our eyes met. His gaze shifted briefly to the bear before returning to me, his expression cold and unreadable. You're back, I stammered, trying to sound casual. Just came to get something, Ethan replied, his face expressionless as he walked past me without a second glance. I kicked the bear aside and grabbed onto his arm. Ethan, I said, my voice trembling. He froze, closing his eyes as if trying to suppress his frustration. Vivian, enough. I bit my lip, leaning against him. My legs are weak. I can't stand. Ethan suddenly turned around and scooped me up effortlessly, his voice dripping with cold sarcasm. I don't care what game you're playing. If you want to keep Ryan's gift, go ahead. But remember this. I told you. You're mine. Don't even think about escaping. My face flushed crimson at his words. Despite his sharp tone, I felt my heart soften. Ethan, I love you so much, I blurted out. He paused, startled by my sudden confession. Gathering my courage, I looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Ryan gave me a gift. Why don't you ever give me anything? Ethan pressed his lips together, remaining silent. Tears welled up in my eyes under his icy stare. Heaven knows you married me, but you don't love me. I might as well die. A few minutes later, the plush bear was unceremoniously thrown out the door. I sat by the window, now wearing a brand new diamond necklace around my neck. Aren't you going back to work? I asked hesitantly. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he leaned down and silenced me with a kiss. It's still daylight, I protested weakly, but he ignored me, carrying me from the doorway back upstairs to the bedroom. By the time we were done, my once bare neck was adorned with a necklace, a bracelet, and even an anklet he'd insistently clasped around my ankle. I touched the jewelry in amazement. When did you buy all these? Ethan, still looking serious, set me down on the windowsill. It was then I realized things were getting out of hand, but it was too late. I cried and cursed at him, calling him a jerk. Ethan's voice was low, filled with suppressed emotion. Vivian, being treated like this by a jerk. Isn't this exactly what you asked for? Ethan had always been guarded, unwilling to believe the sweet words I said, yet unable to resist my closeness. But this time, I had the patience and the time to slowly melt the ice around his heart. Lately, people around me had noticed a change. They said I had become lovesick. During breaks in my violin rehearsal, I would sneak off to call Ethan, twisting nervously in my seat like a shy schoolgirl. On one such call, Ethan sighed wearily. "I'm in a meeting. If you have something to say, say it." I had been calling him nearly a dozen times a day. He always sounded indifferent, but he still answered every call, giving me the courage to push further. "Will you come to my concert next week?" I asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, not giving him a chance to refuse. I continued, "I'll save you the best seat." I was determined to make a fuss about this. A renowned violinist like me taking the stage for a grand performance. Yet my newlywed husband didn't even seem to care. If Ethan didn't show up, I would be the laughingstock of everyone. My reputation would never recover. "Ethan, you're going to ruin me," I exclaimed. He cut off my rant coldly. "Fine, I'll go." With that, he hung up. My manager stood nearby, looking stunned. "Miss Warren, you and Mr. Carter seem to have such a great relationship. He must be very stable emotionally, right?" Thinking of Ethan's distant attitude, I felt a pang of disappointment. "Yes, very stable. Stable enough that he doesn't want to say a single word to me. Oh, by the way," my manager added with a slight smile, "the event organizers said they could open the private VIP suite on the second level for your husband. Don't worry, it's the best view in the entire venue. Tomorrow night, you'll enchant him like a goddess." In my previous life, my solo violin concert had been a grand success. Surrounded by flowers and thunderous applause, I had taken my final bow. Among the audience, Ryan had sat in the front row, gazing at me with a gentle, admiring expression. That moment had even trended as the #1 topic online. Despite my public clarifications, people insisted on pairing us together. No one had known that behind all the admiration, I sat alone backstage, crouched beneath the curtain. I had typed a message to Ethan in our chat window. "Did you see my performance?" But after a long hesitation, I never sent it. Like a child starved for love, I tried so hard to stand in the spotlight, making noise and seeking attention. Yet the person I secretly loved wouldn't even glance my way. The concert proceeded just as it had in my past life, with an overflowing crowd and a buzz of excitement. Many had come simply because of my name. The atmosphere reached its peak when Ryan arrived, his presence sending the crowd into a frenzy. "You look stunning tonight, Vivian," Ryan said, stepping forward with a bouquet in hand. Knowing now about his connection to William, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease. "Thank you," I replied curtly. Ryan's starry eyes lingered on my face, as if he was waiting for me to say more. I simply nodded. The performance is about to start. Dressed in an elegant gown, I took center stage. My eyes instinctively searched the second-level VIP suite. The seats were dark and empty, with no sign of Ethan. Disappointment crept in, but I quickly shook it off. It didn't matter. As the stage lights dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated me, I stepped to the microphone, my voice soft yet steady. "Tonight, in addition to my violin performance, I have an important announcement to make. I know many of you have been curious about my personal life over the years, even urging me to get married during the holidays." Laughter rippled through the audience, and some began shouting Ryan's name. I leaned closer to the microphone and smiled. "Actually, I'm already married." I raised my hand, showing off the dazzling diamond ring on my finger. Fixing my gaze on the dark second-level suite, I continued, "Mr. Carter, I love you." The crowd erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Whispers buzzed through the room. Who is Mr. Carter? Could it be Ethan Carter, the famous businessman? No way. I thought she and Ryan were together. Did we ship the wrong couple? Amid the sea of chatter, I lifted my violin. "Ethan," I said with a smile, "tonight's piece is for you. It's called Unspoken Love. I wrote it when I was young, inspired by my feelings for you. Back then, I was too proud and sensitive to express myself, and that's why we missed so many years." The haunting melody of the violin filled the hall, carrying a bittersweet mix of longing and tenderness. Little did I know that the once empty VIP suite now held a tall, broad figure. He stood silently, his eyes fixed on the stage. In the dim light, his gaze softened, reflecting the figure of the woman in the spotlight. His heart raced uncontrollably, pounding against his ribcage with a mixture of pain and joy that spread through his entire body. "Vivian," he whispered hoarsely, lifting his hand as if to touch the image of me on the stage. His fingers hovered in the air, trembling slightly, as though afraid the vision would disappear. Like a sailor entranced by a siren, he was willing to risk everything, even knowing the danger. As I glanced around the audience, confused about his absence, his voice tightened with emotion. "Vivian, I'll trust you one last time, but if you're lying to me again..." His fingers clenched tightly in the air, his eyes flickering with both despair and determination. "I won't let you go." After the performance, I rushed backstage, my heart racing. "Did Ethan come?" I asked breathlessly. My manager smiled. "Yes, he was here." Mr. Carter didn't miss a moment. I rushed out of the banquet hall, trembling slightly at the thought of meeting him. Did Ethan see the gift I prepared for him? Would he hold me and tell me how wonderful my performance was tonight? But after searching the entire venue, I couldn't find him anywhere. At some point, Ryan appeared beside me. "Vivian, were you acting just now?" he asked, his voice laced with an edge. I avoided his touch and said, "I have something urgent to do." Ryan grabbed my hand, his expression seemingly calm but his grip betraying a hint of desperation. His face still wore that charming smile. "Since when have you and Ethan become so close?" I yanked my hand away forcefully. "Why shouldn't we be close? We're married." Ryan's expression stiffened, his handsome features retreating into the shadows. After a moment, he curled his lips into a faint smirk. "Really? But it seems he's already left." "That's impossible. Ethan wouldn't leave," I said firmly. Suddenly, my manager came rushing over. "Miss Warren, there's a problem. Someone swapped the gift you prepared for Mr. Carter. I found this backstage." She handed me a bottle of champagne, still sealed, lying in the trash bin. Its outer packaging was nowhere to be found. This was the champagne I had carefully chosen for Ethan. He had seen the gift box earlier. He must have known it was meant for him. If the champagne was in the trash, then what was in the gift box? Ryan let out a low, mocking laugh. "Vivian, tonight, I've prepared quite a show for you." I turned to him, meeting his eyes filled with an unsettling madness. My heart sank. Ryan chuckled darkly. "Guess what Ethan will think when he finds out you lured him here just to drug him with the champagne you so carefully prepared? Do you think he'll still love you?" A loud buzzing filled my head, drowning out everything else. "What did you put in his drink?" I demanded, my face pale. Ryan's voice was light, almost casual. "By now, he's probably in bed with some random woman, tangled up in the sheets." I didn't know how I managed to run out of the banquet hall. I called Ethan repeatedly, but his phone was off. Desperate, I went straight to the front desk. "I'm Ethan Carter's wife," I said, my voice shaking. "Please tell me which room he's in." The receptionist gave me an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no record of Mr. Carter in our system." My manager was already on the phone with the event organizers, trying to track Ryan's whereabouts. Suddenly, thought struck me. I grabbed her arm, my voice trembling. "Not him. Have them look up William's song." Ryan's arrogance stemmed from his belief that no one knew about his connection to William's song. Moments later, I received a room number. Clutching my dress, I ran through the dimly lit hallway, my heels clicking against the floor. When I reached the door, I banged on it with all my strength. "Ethan, open the door." The door creaked open slightly, and a glass flew past my ear, shattering against the wall behind me. A rough voice growled, "Get lost," followed by a woman's shrill scream. I stormed into the room, finding it in complete disarray. The woman's dress was slipping off her shoulders as she crawled up from the floor, reaching for Ethan. Furious, I grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the door despite her protests. "Who the hell are you? Let go of me," she screamed. Smack. My hand connected with her face, silencing her. When I finally got a good look at her, a chill ran down my spine. It was Lynn Hanchua, a woman who, in my past life, had silently followed Ryan, harboring feelings for him. I had even helped her once. So, this really was Ryan's doing. This point, Lin Hanshua didn't recognize me. She lay on the ground, her eyes filled with defiance. Ethan touched me. I'm calling the police, she shouted. My manager clamped a hand over her mouth. If you love calling the police so much, go ahead. Let's explain everything in front of them. Right then, Ethan's security team arrived with the police. Lin Hanshua's defiant gaze finally gave way to fear. Ethan's secretary looked at me with concern. Miss Warren, is Mr. Carter okay? I glanced at Ethan. His figure slumped on the bed, his face pale but calm. He'll be fine, I said firmly. I'll stay with him until morning. As soon as the door closed and everyone left, I collapsed onto the floor, utterly drained. Before I could even catch my breath, a large hand suddenly grabbed my neck and yanked me up from the ground. My back slammed into the door with a loud thud. The sharp smell of alcohol invaded my senses as Ethan's bloodshot eyes glared at me, his gaze filled with rage. Get out, he growled, his voice rough. Pain flared through me, and tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to breathe. Ethan, it's me. I managed to choke out, barely audible. Hearing my name seemed to break through his fury for a moment. A flicker of struggle passed through his eyes. Vivian, he murmured, his tone uncertain. Yes, I whispered, trying to soften my voice. Slowly, I reached up to touch his forearm, my fingers trembling. It's me. I came to find you. A faint blush crept over Ethan's pale, handsome face, but confusion clouded his expression. Vivian wouldn't treat me like this, he said hoarsely, his voice laced with pain. She doesn't love me. She's always cold, distant, never like this. I watched helplessly as his emotions spiraled again, his fragile composure shattering. Desperately, I changed my tone, snapping sharply. Ethan, is this how you treat me? His body froze. His eyes, brimming with unshed tears, looked at me as if torn between fury and sorrow. Summoning all my strength, I pried his hand off my neck. Ethan flinched as if burned, his hand recoiling. Fresh air rushed into my lungs as I gasped. Clutching my throat, Ethan leaned against the wall, his head bowed, his eyes shut tightly. The dim light cast shadows across his face, which was streaked with blood, giving him a raw, shattered look, as though he had been utterly humiliated. Coughing, my voice came out hoarse. Ethan, get on the bed. Don't make me repeat myself. His lips trembled slightly before he whispered, okay. Relieved, I quietly exhaled. It didn't matter how. I just needed him to listen for now. Ethan knelt beside the bed, lowering himself slowly, his breathing erratic. His flushed ears and the faint pink staining his neck and collarbone betrayed how much he was struggling. He was in clear agony, but because I was there, he bit his lip and said nothing, refusing to show weakness. My heart softened completely. Gently, I tugged at his tie, coaxing him upward. Ethan followed my movements with an obedient, dazed expression, his gaze fixed on my face. Don't move, I murmured softly. Kneel there. I carefully untied his tie, feeling the heat radiating from his breath on my hand. His skin burned under my touch, leaving a trail of warmth wherever my fingers brushed. Turning off the lights, I tied his wrists to the headboard with the same tie to prevent him from hurting either of us in his disoriented state. Ethan, his voice, tinged with a faint plea, broke the silence. He tilted his head back, revealing a vulnerability that stirred something in me. Watching his helplessness sparked a mischievous impulse. Leaning down, I bit his lips gently. Mr. Carter, why don't you just give in to me? I teased. No, he murmured, his eyes tightly shut. Vivian, don't. I smiled faintly, whispering against his lips. It's me, Vivian. I love you. The tension in his body seemed to ease as though my words had bewitched him. He stayed silent, his breathing shallow but restrained. First, Ethan was obedient. In the darkness, his quiet, restrained gasps were unbearably enticing. Vivian, please, don't, he pleaded softly. Don't what? I asked playfully, continuing to tease him, delighting in his reactions. But the moment the tie loosened, the balance shifted. His restrained rationality snapped, and the beast within him broke free. I gasped in alarm. Ethan, you jerk. Don't. I tried to push him away, but it was futile. He couldn't hear me anymore. In the darkness, the sounds of soft breaths turned into the wild rhythm of chaos. Like a battlefield under the cover of night, his ferocity was relentless, leaving no room for escape. There was no reasoning with a man who had lost control, no refuge from the intense storm he unleashed. His marks covered me, leaving no part of me untouched. By dawn, I finally managed to shove the madman away, scrambling to throw on clothes and flee. At the police station later, Ethan's secretary approached me, her expression uneasy. Miss Warren, you don't look well. Did something happen last night? Remembering the embarrassing scene of my hasty escape, I wished the ground would swallow me whole. Awkwardly, I changed the subject. Can we speed this up? I need to get back. When I left the room, Ethan had already fallen asleep. Thankfully, the situation hadn't spiraled further out of control. Once I finished giving my statement to the police, I hoped this ordeal could be put behind us. It had only been a few hours since the events of the night, and Lynn Hanshua was already taken into police custody. William Song likely hadn't even heard the news yet. Meanwhile, their orchestrated scandal had already started to trend online. Ethan Carter allegedly cheats with a hostess was plastered all over the internet. Photos of Ethan and Lynn Hanshua entering and exiting the hotel room had been taken with unnerving clarity. Within half an hour, the topic skyrocketed to the top of trending searches. The internet erupted with vitriol. Men really are trash. Vivian Warren just announced her marriage, and Ethan slaps her in the face with this? Divorce him. He doesn't deserve her. I was about to post something to clarify, but my manager grabbed my hand. Wait. If you speak out without any evidence, people will think you're just swallowing your pride to cover for Ethan. The police will issue a statement by noon at the latest. By 5:30 a.m., utterly exhausted, I dragged myself back to the room. The curtains hadn't been drawn, and the space was dimly lit. I froze in place when I noticed something strange. The bed was empty. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through me, and I stood there, dumbfounded. A moment later, a scorching body pressed against my back, pulling me into a tight embrace. Ethan. His voice, low and broken, came from behind me. Where were you last night? I was caught off guard. What? He repeated, his voice trembling but eerily calm. Where were you last night? Vivian. I didn't go anywhere. I stammered. Ethan pushed me down onto the bed, his red-rimmed eyes glaring at me with a pain so raw it twisted my heart. His entire body trembled, as if holding back something unbearable. Vivian, doesn't your heart hurt? If you hate me so much, just let me die. Why humiliate me like this? My mind went blank. How did I humiliate you? Is sleeping with me so disgusting? His words struck like a dagger, igniting the despair in his voice. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. You spiked my drink, sent someone to defile me, ruined my reputation, and planned to divorce me. Then what? Do you want me dead? Vivian. His lips were still bruised from where I had bitten him last night, and his disheveled appearance made him look like a man utterly wronged. My eyes darted to his phone on the bed, and I saw the headline dominating the trending searches. Ethan thought he had slept with someone else last night. My expression twisted into something between disbelief and frustration. Wait, just listen to me. Before I could explain, my dress ripped as I moved, exposing the marks he'd left all over me. Ethan froze, his eyes widening with despair as he took in the evidence. He leaned down, his lips trembling as they brushed against mine, his voice hoarse and pleading. Who did this? Vivian, please, tell me. Not only had he forgotten how he'd spent the night tormenting me, but now he thought I'd cheated on him. The frustration and humiliation I'd bottled up all night exploded. I burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably in front of him. Ethan stiffened, completely unprepared for my outburst. Before he could react, I kicked him repeatedly. You jerk. Idiot. Who else could it be but you? His stunned expression turned to shock as my words registered. A red handprint quickly appeared on his face after I slapped him. He sat there, motionless, as if trying to process what had just happened. The despair in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a flicker of something. Hope, disbelief, maybe relief. Slowly, the light in his gaze grew brighter. Still crying, I grabbed my phone and threw it at him. Look. On it were the photos and videos I had secretly taken of him last night. I had planned to keep them as a private memento, maybe even use them to tease him later. The video showed the chaos after he broke free of the tie that bound him. It captured my cries for mercy and his relentless intensity. Ethan's hand trembled as he watched. His eyes filled with panic. Vivian. I thought it was a dream, he stammered. A dream? I snapped, my anger boiling over. What do you mean? A dream? I could no longer suppress my temper. Glaring at him, I shouted, Get out. Didn't you want a divorce? Fine. Let's do it. You're nothing but a heartless bastard. In my rage, I kicked Ethan so hard he almost fell off the bed. He sat there, dazed, as if trying to grasp the full weight of my words. It took him a moment to process everything. Finally, Ethan grabbed hold of my kicking leg and pulled me into a tight embrace. I'll take responsibility, he said firmly, ignoring my struggles. As long as we don't divorce, you can do whatever you want. A few hours later, I threw the door open with a commanding air. Stepping out confidently, those waiting in the hallway immediately turned their attention to me. Ethan, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, followed closely behind, his tall figure exuding quiet authority. Reporters swarmed us in an instant. Is it true? Someone shouted. Mr. Carter, did you really cheat on Ms. Warren with a hostess? Ethan remained silent, his dark eyes fixed solely on me, as if he hadn't even heard the questions. I casually flicked my hair and covered my mouth with mock surprise. Seriously? These days, even a married couple booking a hotel room becomes gossip fodder for you all, I said with a smile. For your information, the person from last night has already been taken into police custody. Please wait for the official statement. Their endless questions gave me a headache. Ethan's cold gaze swept over the crowd before he covered my ears with his hands and pulled me away from the chaos. His team stepped in to block the reporters, allowing us to leave undisturbed. Once we were in the car, I shook off Ethan's hand and sat down with a smug expression, feeling a small victory. Yet, there was still a nagging sense that something was missing. Ethan sat silently beside me, surprisingly compliant despite how close he'd come to losing control just hours ago. Lifting my hand, I pointedly wiggled my fingers. Don't you think my thumb, index finger, middle finger, and pinky are missing a few rings? Who do you think is kind enough to gift me some? Ethan's expression stiffened, avoiding my gaze. He muttered, I'll buy them for you. In an instant, I leaned toward him, grinning mischievously. Ethan, I said sweetly. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, closing his eyes briefly. He murmured. I love you. I whispered. This time, he didn't push me away. Instead, his gaze softened as he looked at me, his voice steady and sincere. I love you too. Later, as the parties involved, Ethan and I went to the police station. After investigating the matter, the authorities issued an official statement. Lynn Hanshua was temporarily detained and would face charges. The news spread quickly online, sparking heated discussions. Some people couldn't resist throwing shade. I can't believe Vivian would cover for a man like this. Who would want a dirty man like Ethan? Others chimed in sarcastically. They're probably just using each other for business. Maybe they're playing their own games behind the scenes. Back home, I kept rambling to Ethan as we walked through the door. Don't pay attention to the nonsense online. People just like to talk. But none of it matters. Don't take it to heart. In my past life, after Ethan's death, slanderous comments about him flooded the internet. With William Song pulling the strings, things escalated to the point where vandals poured oil over Ethan's gravestone. The memory of that devastation made me anxious. I reached for his phone. Log out of your accounts. Don't check them for a few days. Before I could finish, Ethan pulled me into a tight embrace. The villa was dark, and the silence of the night seemed to stretch endlessly. His voice broke through the quiet, filled with raw vulnerability. Vivian, my body belongs to you. Don't abandon me. For the first time, Ethan let go of his hardened exterior, baring his heart completely. My chest ached as tears filled my eyes. I buried myself in his arms. Ethan, I have a story. Do you want to hear it? I told him everything. About the missed chances in our past life. About William Song's treachery. About Ryan and my history. And about the people he needed to be wary of. But when it came to the end, I fell silent. Ethan listened intently. Finally, he asked, his tone grave, "How did I die?" Curled up in his embrace. My whole body shook as memories of that nightmare overwhelmed me. "You were pushed off a cliff. William lied to you, saying I was at the summit. On your way up, someone tampered with your brakes. You were thrown from the car." My voice broke as I sobbed, clutching his cold fingertips. "You didn't even grab hold of the last branch." That moment, Ethan, your death, has haunted me ever since. It's a nightmare I can't escape. I described arriving at the scene, seeing the wrecked car, the scattered dirt, the claw marks on the ground where he had desperately tried to hold on. Every night, I imagined the pain he must have felt, falling from such a great height, how much it must have hurt. Ethan gently stroked my back, placing a soft kiss on my forehead. "That's enough. Let's stop here for tonight." Unwilling to let the matter rest, I grabbed his arm. "Remember what I said about those people. You have to be careful." His gaze darkened, filled with a mesmerizing warmth. "Silly girl," he murmured. "I already know about them." I froze. Ethan, who managed such a massive business empire, couldn't possibly be oblivious. The documents I had painstakingly collected. He only gave the document a brief glance before concluding it was fake. But why was he able to see through it in this life and not in the last? Sensing my confusion, Ethan let out a sigh, lowering his gaze as he steadied me. "Vivian," he said quietly, "in this world, the only person I would willingly die for is you. If you asked me, I'd give up struggling." Tears streaked my face, cold and heavy. I suddenly stood up, staring blankly at Ethan. I would never let Ethan die. But what if someone pretended to be me? "Ryan," I muttered. My voice must have betrayed something because Ethan's expression immediately tensed. "It's Ryan," I repeated, scrambling to my feet and reaching for my phone. Before I could do anything, Ethan grabbed my hand, his gaze fixed on me with unease. "Vivian," he said hesitantly, "you promised you'd always stay by my side." Anger bubbled up inside me, and I shouted, "That damn Ryan. I'm going to settle the score with him. He and his idiot brother tricked me so badly." Ethan froze for a moment, a sharp light flashing briefly in his dark eyes. A few minutes later, he held me tightly in his arms as I trembled with rage. Despite my outburst, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Enough. Calm down," he murmured. I shook with frustration in his embrace, tears streaming down my face. "I've been deceived. He must have said something to you. That scumbag." Ethan lowered his head, gently pressing his face into the crook of my neck. His voice was soft but firm as he echoed, "Yes, he's a scumbag." The trending scandal online was eventually suppressed. Lin Hanshua disappeared without a trace, while Ethan revealed that William Song operated an underground money laundering operation in North City. Dirty money would enter and come out clean. Everything clicked. No wonder William had wielded such influence in my past life, straddling both the black market and legitimate circles with ease. I sat in a sunlit dining room, Ethan watching me with an unreadable expression. His dark eyes were warm, filled with a light that seemed to envelop me. "Vivian," he called out suddenly, his voice low. I froze, caught off guard by the unexpected tenderness in his tone. Meeting his gaze, I couldn't help but think about the recent nights we had spent together, and my face flushed red. My heart raced as I stammered, "Why are you calling me like that all of a sudden?" "This time, I'll win," Ethan said firmly, propping my chin on my hand. I leaned closer with a playful smile, my fingers toying with his collar. "Mr. Carter, do you need my help?" Ethan's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, grabbing my wrist. He looked at me intently. "How would you help me?" I whispered my plan softly, but his face darkened immediately. "No," he said, his voice hard with finality. I climbed onto his lap, straddling him. "Don't you think Ryan's resources are suspiciously good?" Ethan's expression remained tense, his resolve unwavering. "Pressed on. knowing he needed to hear this. Ryan and I both grew up in the orphanage. I was adopted by your mentor and sent overseas to study music, enduring strict discipline from my adoptive parents to achieve success. But Ryan debuted at the peak of his career, with endless opportunities and even won Best Actor in his first year. I always thought it was luck. But now that I know about his connection to William Song, it all makes sense. Ethan stayed silent, his jaw tight, seeing his resistance. I smiled and said lightly, "Business might be your domain, but when it comes to the entertainment industry, Mr. Carter, I know the ropes better than you. Let me approach Ryan. It's the best way to deal with him." "Absolutely not." Ethan snapped, his tone resolute. Leaning closer, I rested my head against his chest, smiling sweetly. "How can I feel secure having a child with you while this threat still looms?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "A child?" I kissed him lightly on the lips. "Don't you want a child? Don't you want to give them a safe, happy future? If we had a daughter, could you bear for her to grow up in a world filled with danger?" His expression softened for a moment, but then his gaze turned solemn. "I won't allow it," he said firmly. "You won't go near him. We came to an agreement." Ethan finally realized I had maneuvered him into a corner. His voice deepened as he said, "Vivian." Meeting my determined gaze, he ultimately conceded. "Fine, I'll agree. But only if you return to me every night." The night before my father's birthday banquet, I called Ryan. The phone rang for a long time before he finally picked up. His voice smooth and low. "Vivian, you finally decided to call me." On the phone, I feigned sobs, my voice shaky. "Ryan, you were right. Ethan really is a jerk. I shouldn't have helped him. I regret it." Across from me, the so-called jerk in question was peeling a lychee for me. At my words, his fingers clenched so hard the fruit's flesh was bruised. Ryan's voice softened. "It's good that you've come to your senses. We've known each other since childhood. Would I ever lie to you?" "I know," I replied, biting into the lychee Ethan handed me. As I did, I made a point of licking his fingertips. His hand froze midair, and I gave him a satisfied glance before turning back to the phone. "See you tomorrow then." As expected, I didn't get to enjoy any more lychees that night. Instead, I ended up crying as Ethan dragged me into the bedroom. My father had been a professor at a prestigious business school in his younger years, and many of his students had gone on to achieve great success. Naturally, his birthday banquet was a grand affair, and William Song was among the invited guests. For the sake of appearances, I went back home alone the night before. My parents looked visibly disappointed when I arrived without Ethan. "Vivian," my mother asked cautiously, "how are you and Ethan doing?" 4 years. The Cold War and my marriage with Ethan had been their biggest worry. Steeling myself, I replied flatly, "The same as always." On the day of the banquet, our relationship became the center of gossip once again. Ethan greeted my parents with his usual politeness before mingling effortlessly with the guests, exchanging pleasantries with the business crowd. Standing on the second-floor balcony in a light gold mermaid gown, I watched him from a distance. He stood out in his sharp suit, exuding quiet confidence and poise as he engaged with the crowd. Across from him, William Song smirked, his tone laced with mockery. "Mr. Carter, you're quite ruthless in business, swooping in at the last second to steal my deal. Is that what you call heroic?" Ethan responded with a low chuckle. "All's fair in business. You and I both know there are no saints in this field." My gaze lingered on Ethan's profile, momentarily lost in thought, until someone called my name. "Miss Warren." I turned to see a guest waving at me from below. The crowd followed their gaze, exclaiming as they noticed me. Ethan immediately stopped talking, his eyes darkening as they locked onto mine. His intense gaze swept over my face before trailing down my neck and further, making my ears burn. Flustered, I tilted my head slightly and descended the stairs. Under his watchful eyes, I walked toward Ryan, who was waiting at the side. William Song laughed loudly, his tone mocking. "Successful in business but unlucky in love. Huh, looks like Miss Warren prefers the younger, better-looking type." I didn't dare look back at Ethan. Internally, I cursed William Song 800 times over. Did he have any idea how much trouble a single comment like that would cause me later? Ryan seemed ready to taunt Ethan further. But I grabbed his arm and hissed, "Shut up." Years ago, Ryan and I used to play in the little garden outside. After all this time, it was still lush and vibrant. Watching Ryan dig around in the soil, I asked bluntly, "What's your relationship with William Song?" Ryan froze, his back stiffening. "Did Ethan tell you?" Before he could recover, I smacked the back of his head twice. "You have a rich older brother. And you didn't tell me? Are you an idiot? Seriously, are you stupid?" Ryan looked utterly bewildered, the sly glint in his eyes vanishing. "Vivian," he said cautiously. I glared at him, my face full of anger. "If I'd known your brother was loaded, I won't marry Ethan," I said firmly. Ryan's expression didn't change. He stared at me for a while, a faint smile appearing in his captivating eyes. "No," he replied. "But you can't marry my brother either. I'd rather you stay with me forever." A flash of memory from my past life hit me. After Ethan's death, Ryan had crouched before Ethan's grave and uttered the same words. At the time, my heart had been shattered. I'd pushed his hand away, and not long after, I died in a car accident. The spring sunlight was warm, yet I felt cold to my core. Forcing a light tone, I asked, "What if I don't agree?" Ryan's beautiful face still held a smile, but the tear mole beneath his eye made his grin seem even more devilish. "Then I'll just have to bury you," he said with a teasing lilt. A chilling sense of unease crept up my spine, leaving me speechless. Suddenly, Ryan clutched his stomach, laughing so hard that tears formed in his eyes. "Did I scare you?" he teased. "Vivian, you're such an idiot. Next time, don't call me one." Impatiently, I shook off his hand. "Your brother is so rich, yet you don't bring me any of his money, and you still think I'd stay with you? You must be crazy." Ryan resumed digging, his tone casual. "If you really want it, I can get it for you. It's not like I can't earn money the way he does." My hands clenched into fists. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to let it go for now. "That's enough for today," I said, masking my frustration. Composing myself, I looked up, only to find Ryan gazing at me with a thoughtful expression. "What?" I snapped. He smirked. "Aren't you curious how I make money?" "Not interested," I said with a pout, waving him off. "Now, what are you giving me?" He handed me a small clay figurine, its surface still smudged with dirt. The craftsmanship was a little crude, but the features bore a striking resemblance to me. "This," Ryan explained, "was something I made before my debut. I told myself that if I ever became famous, I'd dig it up and give it to you. Why didn't you give it to me before?" I asked. Ryan smiled faintly. "A clay figure I made as a kid wouldn't be worth anything compared to something handcrafted by a celebrity, right? I was afraid you'd find it cheap." I had been about to tell him that a friend's gift, regardless of value, was always precious to me, but memories of Ryan's strange behavior in my previous life made me swallow my words. I simply tucked the figurine away carefully and said, "It's getting late. Let's head back." "All right," he replied. By then, the elderly guests had retired early, leaving the second half of the banquet to the younger crowd. While Ryan was caught up chatting with someone, I slipped away to the upstairs bedroom for a quick break. As soon as I entered, I was pressed against the door. Ethan's voice, low and heavy with jealousy, growled, "What were you doing?" Feeling the intense possessiveness radiating from him, I couldn't help but smirk. My voice turned teasing. "Guess." His response was a domineering, passionate kiss. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, shattering the moment. "Vivian, are you in there?" Ryan's clear voice called out, followed by the sound of his phone ringing. Startled, I whispered urgently, "Ethan, it's Ryan. He's here." Ethan's rough, calloused hands moved boldly, removing any barrier between us. In an instant, he pulled me into his overwhelming embrace, his touch relentless and consuming. I gasped, my eyes widening in disbelief. "Ethan, have you lost your mind?" Ryan was still calling my phone, but when I reached for it, Ethan snatched it away and turned it off without hesitation. His teeth grazed the back of my neck, throwing off my composure completely. "Still thinking about him?" he taunted. "You're such a bad woman." Biting my lip, I couldn't help but tease back. "Bad woman? But you still love me." My voice broke into fragments as his movements intensified. That moment, I was beyond grateful for the soundproofing of the room. Soon, Ryan gave up looking for me and left. Ethan's deep, sultry voice brushed against my ear like a stone skipping across a still lake, creating endless ripples. On April 21st, I left a lipstick mark on Ethan's shirt. He hadn't contacted me. It was May 13th. And I was wearing a newly purchased short skirt that clung tightly to my hips, striking in bold. Yet Ethan didn't even glance at me. Later that night, in the dark, I stared wide-eyed in shock, a mix of embarrassment and anger boiling over. "Ethan, you jerk. Who told you to read my diary?" I hissed. He had locked me in his room and placed the diary open on the bed. Even if he hadn't intended to read it, it was impossible to ignore. Oh no. I suddenly remembered that I had written something last night about him, something embarrassing, and forgotten to put it away this morning. Ethan, seemingly more stirred than usual, led me to the diary, his grip firm on my jaw. His voice was low and heated as he commanded, "Read it to me, Vivian." My face turned crimson. I shook my head defiantly. "Not a chance." "Vivian," he murmured, his tone slightly obsessive. "You think I'm too old for you, don't you?" His possessiveness flared again, refusing to let me off the hook. "Am I not enough for you? Is my body not to your satisfaction?" I was at a loss for words, shaking my head repeatedly. "It's not that. It's not that at all." But Ethan didn't seem convinced. Instead, he pressed me relentlessly, testing me over and over until I finally broke into tears. Through his actions and soft kisses, he sought my answer until I had no choice but to admit, humiliated, the embarrassing secret I had written in my diary. Reading aloud those shy confessions left me utterly mortified. Ethan couldn't suppress a quiet laugh, which only made me angrier. My voice trembled with tears as I scolded him. "How dare you laugh?" His steady hand caught my fingers as he chuckled softly. "I'm laughing at myself," he said, his tone surprisingly tender. "It's like the clouds have finally cleared, and I can see the moon." Thankfully, Ethan had the presence of mind not to ruin my light gold dress. When I reappeared at the banquet, my face was cold, clearly brimming with suppressed fury. Ethan, on the other hand, had a faint handprint on his face but said nothing. The guests cautiously observed us, sensing the tension but not daring to ask any questions. My mother sighed. "Vivian, in a marriage, both sides need to compromise." Thinking back to Ethan's brazen behavior earlier, I shot him a glare. I can't compromise at all. Clearly, I was the one being wronged, but here he was, acting innocent and putting on a show in front of the elders. It was infuriating. Ever since Ethan discovered my diary, I'd been utterly embarrassed. From that day on, I moved back into my parents' house. The promise I made to Ethan about returning to him every night? That went out the window. This time, Ethan was surprisingly tactful, keeping silent on the matter. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, autumn was here. Ethan's birthday was just a few days away. I began planning a surprise for him. After some effort, I reconnected with an old classmate. "So, I heard you can name stars. You mean the star naming service?" "Yes. I'd like 2 stars close to each other." "Got it. Send me the details later." Once the arrangement was finalized, I could relax and wait for Ethan's birthday to arrive. He'd been busy traveling across the country for business, often responding to messages late or not at all. In the meantime, I had reconnected with Ryan, who had introduced me to several of the Song family's associates. To my shock, I discovered how deeply their influence had infiltrated various industries. Ryan, once the playful boy I knew, now moved effortlessly among them, his demeanor cool and calculating. He was no longer the person I remembered. I managed to gather a lot of evidence, but William Song was extremely cautious, never appearing in any visible capacity. I wanted to push further, but Ethan sternly warned me to stop. "Leave the rest to me," he said firmly. With the evidence in hand, William's business suffered significant losses. The tragedies of my past life, the pain, the loss, might never happen again. I used the excuse of being sick to temporarily cut off contact with Ryan. Today was Ethan's birthday. Early in the morning, holding a positive pregnancy test with 2 clear lines, I called him. Remember to come home tonight. I have a surprise for you. Ethan was unusually quiet today. I chatted nonstop about random things, but he only listened. His responses sparse. Finally, I ran out of things to say, and there was a moment of silence. Through the headset, I could hear his steady breathing. "What's with you?" I teased, smiling. "Why aren't you saying anything?" After a pause, Ethan's deep voice came through. "Vivian, will you wish me a happy birthday?" Caught off guard, I asked, "Don't you know how to be romantic? I've been planning tonight's surprise for ages." He chuckled softly, the sound warm and rich. "I can't wait." "Not until tonight," I insisted stubbornly. Hearing my determination, Ethan laughed again but didn't press the matter. I tucked the pregnancy test into a small gift box, whispering to myself, "This surprise will definitely be unforgettable." Then I added softly, "I love you, Ethan." The word slipped out so unexpectedly that I blushed furiously and quickly hung up the phone. News of my pregnancy thrilled my parents. My mother, overjoyed, immediately took my hand. "Let's go to the hospital and get you checked out." Before she could drag me out the door, my father stopped her. "Ethan just called," he reminded her. "Let's have the family doctor come instead." Realizing something, her expression softened. "Fine. Let's call Dr. Chow." Dr. Chow, who had been looking after my parents' health for years, was someone they trusted implicitly. He had watched me grow up. After checking my pulse, he stroked his beard and smiled. "This is likely true, but you should go to the hospital to confirm it." The house was filled with joy. We invited Dr. Chow to stay for lunch, and afterward, I went upstairs to take a nap. Before I fell asleep, my phone lit up with a message from Ryan. Though sleepiness overtook me, I caught a glimpse of the words, "Vivian, we promised to stay together forever." When I woke up, I found myself in the back of a moving van. The strong smell of diesel made me nauseous. A large hand was gently stroking my hair as Ryan's cold voice drifted from the front seat. "William and Ethan are both tied up, watching each other like dogs fighting over scraps. By tonight, neither of them will survive." It took me a moment to process what was happening. I was with Ryan, seeing my eyes flutter open. He smiled gently. "You're awake. Why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy sooner?" I shivered, jerking away from his hand and retreating into the corner of the van. "Why am I here?" I demanded. Half of Ryan's face was hidden in the shadows, his tone lazy but filled with malice. "Ethan thought he had everything under control. If not for Dr. Chow and his dying daughter, I wouldn't have been able to see you at all." I glared at him, my body tense with fear. Ryan suddenly grabbed my jaw, pulling me close as a sinister smile spread across his face. "You dared to abandon me for that bastard Ethan. Guess how I'll punish you, Vivian." Nausea welled up inside me, and I began dry heaving, clutching my stomach. Ryan's face darkened. "Stop the car," he barked. The van door opened, and fresh air rushed in. I stumbled out, gripping the roadside railing as I vomited until I felt faint. The distant glow of city lights blurred into scattered points on the horizon. Leaves rustled in the breeze, and as I looked around, I recognized the scene. My legs gave out beneath me. It was this mountain. In my past life, Ethan had died here. I had walked this road countless times, so many that I could recall every tree and rock with my eyes closed. "Where is Ethan?" I screamed, grabbing Ryan by his shirt. Ryan sneered. "Probably locked in a life or death struggle with my brother." He should have known when he accepted that invitation that he wouldn't leave alive. A chill ran down my spine as memories of this morning's call flooded back to me. Ethan's deep voice echoed in my mind, "Vivian, will you wish me a happy birthday? Don't you know how to be romantic? I've been planning tonight's surprise for so long. I can't wait." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I clamped my hand over my mouth, my body slowly curling into itself. Ethan didn't plan to make it out alive. His lowered gaze and soft sigh carried a trace of regret. "After tonight, the Song family will be in shambles. Only I'll remain, leading a group of useless fools. But dying with you by my side wouldn't be so bad." Ryan's voice echoed sharply through the mountain air. Mocking, I took advantage of his monologue, grabbing a rock and hurling it at the driver's head. The driver collapsed instantly. I scrambled into the van, trying to seize the steering wheel, but headlights flared on from every direction, bathing the area in blinding light. Ryan yanked me out of the van by my hair, his dark eyes brimming with malice. His laughter rang coldly. "Vivian, why can't you just learn to behave? You've always liked me the most. Why did you let that bastard throw away the teddy bear I gave you?" My stomach churned as fear coursed through me. Ryan grinned wickedly. "Without him, I wouldn't even get to see you." A chilling realization struck me like lightning. The teddy bear. He had placed a surveillance camera in its eye. In my past life, I had unknowingly clung to his spying device every night. "You're insane," I screamed at him, my voice trembling with fury. "Why are you doing this to me? I never harmed you." Ryan tilted his head, then let out a soft laugh. "I never said you harmed me. I don't hate you, Vivian. I love you. But you betrayed me. And now you're carrying that bastard's child. So let's die together." "Okay. You're a lunatic," I shouted, my voice breaking. Just then, someone came running toward us from the distance. "Mr. Song, something's happened." "What's the panic?" Ryan asked lazily, though his expression darkened. "Mr. Song is dead. Ethan is still alive." Ryan sneered, unbothered. "He doesn't think killing William Song ends it all, does he? There's still another wave of fools ready to take his life." The man handed Ryan a photo. It showed Ethan, injured and kneeling on the ground, blood staining his chest. Seeing it, I began struggling violently, my hands clutching at Ryan's arm. "Please," I sobbed, desperation pouring out of me. "Don't kill him. I'm begging you." My broken cries echoed through the mountain forest. Ryan stared at me coldly, then seemed to think of something amusing. He helped me to my feet and handed me my phone. "Let's play a little game." I snatched the phone and quickly dialed 911. Ryan's smirk widened. "Oh, causing quite the scene, aren't you? Right now, all the police are over there. Ethan's life is likely safe for the moment. Of course, you can call and have them redirected here. But I guarantee you, the second that happens, Ethan will die horribly." I froze. The operator's voice on the other end sang, "Hello, this is 911. How may we assist you?" The cold mountain wind whipped through my hair, carrying away what little hope I had. Ryan calmly plucked the phone from my hands and hung up. "You're lying," I screamed, grabbing him by the collar. Ryan laughed cruelly. "You don't have to believe me. What's the worst that could happen? Maybe I'm just fooling you. But, Vivian, would you dare gamble Ethan's life on it?" I couldn't. I knew I couldn't. Ryan grabbed my face, his tone light but menacing. "Here's a second option. Call Ethan. Say what you want to say to him. After all, you won't be seeing him again." The forest fell silent. Only the sound of the wind remained, rustling through the leaves. My trembling hand struck his face. "You're a monster." Ryan chuckled, his icy demeanor unshaken. Slowly, he pressed the barrel of a gun to my forehead. "Now, be good. Choose, the police or Ethan. Do you die? Or does Ethan die?" My breath hitched, my vision blurred, and my entire body quaked. The truth struck me like a dagger in my past life. My fatal car accident had been orchestrated by Ryan. To him, I was nothing more than a puppet, toy to control. And if I refused to comply, my only fate was death. After what felt like an eternity, I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. "I'll call Ethan." Ryan's smile widened, his lips curling cruelly. "Go ahead. Then, remember, keep your emotions in check. If he senses anything is wrong and calls for help, you know what the consequences will be." I dialed the number, and the cheerful ringtone I had personally set for Ethan played through the receiver. This time, it rang for a long while before he picked up. His voice was unsteady. "Vivian, what's wrong?" "I'm heading home tonight." Kneeling in the icy wind, I covered my trembling lips with my hand, wiping away the endless stream of tears rolling down my cheeks. The cold steel of the gun pressed into the back of my head, the sound of the chamber being loaded clicking ominously in my ears. Ethan called my name several times before I bit my lip, forcing a smile into my voice. "Ethan, happy birthday." He hesitated for a moment, then chuckled softly. "Didn't you say you'd wait until tonight?" Struggling to breathe, I gasped out, "I couldn't wait. You know me. I'm impatient." "And what about my gift?" Ryan yanked my hair, pulling my head back sharply. The pressure of the gun against my skull tightened, cutting off my breath. My voice wavered as I choked out. There's no gift. I didn't prepare anything. Not even a cake. Ethan paused on the other end of the line. Then shouldn't you make it up to me somehow? After a long silence, I closed my eyes and whispered, fine. You have half an hour to get home. If you're late, I'll be mad. All right. Stay home and wait for me. Turn on the lights if you're scared. Ethan. Yes. I love you. His voice softened. I love you too. The screen of the phone flickered a few times before going dark. Curling into myself, I finally broke into heart-wrenching sobs. Ryan grabbed the phone from me and casually tossed it over the cliff. Get in the car, he ordered coldly. Completely defeated, I climbed into the van without a word, ignoring everything Ryan said as he began reminiscing about our past. His words revealed how deeply he had misunderstood me, to an almost ridiculous degree. Even the smallest gestures, like sharing snacks, had convinced him I harbored feelings for him. My silence seemed to provoke him further. He became agitated, his tone both desperate and menacing, biting and kissing my lips roughly. He growled, Vivian, let's die together. Okay, we'll be buried in the same grave. My eyes, now devoid of light, stared blankly ahead. I don't want to die buried in the ground. Ethan would lose his mind if he saw that. If I was fated to die tonight, I wanted it to be like last time, falling off the cliff, leaving nothing behind. As the van approached a tunnel, I suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the steering wheel. The piercing screech of brakes tore through the night as the van veered wildly, crashing into the guardrail. The world spun, lights and shadows blurring together in chaotic motion. Ryan's furious shouts and the driver's panicked yells were drowned out by the cacophony of blaring horns and a blinding flash of light. The impact came with a deafening crash, silencing everything. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, survival instinct kicked in. I fumbled for the door handle, desperate to escape, but a hand clamped down on my wrist. I turned to see Ryan, blood pouring from his chest where a pipe had impaled him. Blood mixed with saliva dripped from his lips as he gasped. Vivian, let's die together. I've come this far for you. I've hurt so many people for you. You can't leave me. Tears streamed down my face as I stared at the desperation in his eyes. Without a word, I pried his fingers off me one by one, pushed open the door, and stumbled out into the night. The scene outside was blindingly bright, flashing red and blue lights flooding the mountainside. Sirens from police cars and ambulances wailed, disorienting me as I staggered forward. My steps faltered, but I forced myself to keep moving toward the front of the van. There, a Rolls-Royce sat smashed against the van, white smoke billowing from its mangled hood. My voice broke into a choked sob as I took in the wreckage. Blood trickled from my forehead, blurring my vision as it covered one eye. I stumbled closer, my legs trembling. The sight mirrored the accident from my past life. The car was wrecked, its front door missing, and the driver nowhere to be seen. A surge of terror overtook me. I instinctively turned toward the cliff, frantically searching for Ethan. My feet carried me toward the edge, but before I could reach it, a swarm of people rushed forward, grabbing hold of me. I collapsed to my knees, the skin scraping against the rough ground, leaving it raw and bleeding. Desperation consumed me as I clawed my way down the mountain, my cries breaking into incoherent wails. Why was this happening again? Why, even after starting over, did it have to end like this? Ethan had swerved his car to block the van's route. He had taken my place to save me. Help him. Save him. I begged anyone around me, struggling madly in someone's grasp. My ears rang so loudly it felt like my head would split open, drowning out every sound except the chaos around me. The weight of the noise pressed in. Shouting, sirens, and the endless clamor spilling into my ears like a trash heap. I clung to the ground, my fingernails tearing against the dirt, blood staining the earth beneath me. A hand grabbed my shoulder roughly, forcing me to turn around. That's when I saw him. Ethan, covered in blood, kneeling before me. His eyes were rimmed red, his mouth opening and closing as if he were speaking. But I couldn't hear anything. I trembled violently, my teeth chattering, my arms shaking, even my face twitching like a contorted monster. My fingers dug into his flesh, desperate to anchor myself to something real. Ethan pulled me into his arms, his hand stroking my hair softly. It took a long time before his words finally broke through the haze. Vivian, just sleep, sleep, and everything will be okay. That night, I fell into a restless slumber, plagued by nightmares. One moment, I stood at Ethan's funeral. The next, I was buried alive in cold, suffocating soil. Then I saw Ryan, his vacant eyes glaring at me with unrelenting malice. I flailed helplessly, drowning in the terror of my dreams, until suddenly, I surfaced. Harsh fluorescent lights pierced my vision, forcing me to shut my eyes again. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the air, accompanied by a sharp pain radiating through my body, as if my bones had been shattered. Ethan came in just as I was struggling to get out of bed, clutching the railing to steady myself. I nearly collapsed, but he dropped the fruit in his hands and caught me just in time. Vivian. His voice was steady, but the raw emotion beneath it was unmistakable. I clung to him tightly, his heartbeat grounding me as the remnants of my nightmares began to fade. He gently stroked my hair, his tone soft but firm. Don't rush. Rest a little longer. Your parents are fine. The baby is fine. And you'll be fine too. Despite his efforts to stay composed, I could feel the faint tremble in his body. Warm tears rolled down his cheeks, soaking into my collar. Vivian, do you think I could go on living if I lost you? My throat burned, raw and hoarse from the screams I'd unleashed earlier. I couldn't speak, even though I wanted to. That day, I refused to let Ethan out of my sight, gripping his hand like a lifeline at the slightest movement. In the end, he had no choice but to crawl into bed beside me, holding me until I fell asleep. It wasn't until a week later that I regained my ability to speak, though my voice was still weak and uneven. By then, I had recovered enough to sit up and look through my phone. Headlines about Ryan and William Song's deaths dominated the news. Ryan had died in a car crash, while William had succumbed to illness. With their downfall, the Song family empire crumbled overnight. Public mourning for Ryan flooded the internet, but no one knew the dark truths lurking beneath the surface. As investigations unfolded, countless unresolved cases and scandals tied to the Song family were unearthed. Those involved were gradually brought to justice. Not long after the incident, Ethan acquired all of the Song family's remaining assets. His name shot to the top of the year's most influential billionaire rankings, and any lingering rumors about him vanished without a trace. His business empire grew into something both immense and quietly untouchable. Sometimes, I found myself staring blankly out the window, memories of Ryan surfacing unexpectedly. For those of us who grew up in an orphanage, emotional bonds often carried an overwhelming weight. Those childhood memories, filled with fleeting happiness, remained my most treasured possession. Ryan had always accused me of betraying him, but hadn't he betrayed me first? I packed up Ryan's belongings and, before his cremation, entrusted them to Ethan to be sent to the funeral home. Those mementos disappeared into the flames, leaving nothing behind but ash. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the weather was perfect. I was sulking with Ethan, irritated because my attempt at singing Happy Birthday to him ended up sounding like a duck quacking. Ethan's brows relaxed, and he quickly lowered his head. I had the distinct feeling he was trying not to laugh. By the time his secretary came to pick me up, I was standing outside in the cold, stubbornly wearing a fluffy hat and glaring at the wind. I swore I wouldn't speak another word to Ethan for the rest of my life. Suddenly, a soft voice broke through my pouty silence. "Excuse me, sir. Is this your handkerchief?" Ethan and I both turned at the same time to see a pretty woman holding up his handkerchief. Ethan nodded politely. "Yes, it's mine. Thank you." The woman blushed and began to reach for her phone. But when she caught sight of my stormy expression, she seemed to realize something and quickly muttered, "Sorry." Before walking away in a hurry, I climbed into the car, slamming the door shut. Ethan followed, settling in beside me. "Vivian," he said gently, "what do you want for dinner tonight?" Mimicking his tone with exaggerated sarcasm, I replied, "Handkerchief. Thank you." Ethan froze, then turned to face the window, covering his mouth with his hand. A few moments later, the car was filled with the sound of my angry voice. "Ethan, are you laughing? You dare laugh again. And I'll. Not laughing anymore. He cut in quickly, trying to stifle his amusement. I'm done. When our son was born, he looked more like a little monkey than a baby. I often cupped Ethan's face, squinting at him suspiciously. You didn't secretly have plastic surgery, did you? Ethan, holding a milk bottle in one hand and supporting my waist with the other, looked at me with those deep, mesmerizing eyes that made my heart flutter. The doctor said the baby will grow into his looks, he teased. Ethan's parenting instincts were sharper than mine. For a month, he tirelessly looked after the baby, ensuring every detail was perfect. By the time the baby's features began to soften and take on a resemblance to Ethan, I finally let out a sigh of relief. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, our son was 3.5. It was around this age in my previous life that Ethan and I had met our end. The thought of it still felt surreal, as if those painful days belonged to another lifetime. I thought Ethan's love letters were my private treasure, a secret buried deep within me. Yet one morning, the unexpected happened. They were leaked online. Ethan, still overseas, received a call from the company's PR department. Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter is trending on social media. The video showed me, during Ethan's absence, casually boasting at a bar. Our Ethan Carter may look all cold and emotionless, but don't be fooled. He secretly writes love letters. Don't believe me? I'll steal one to show you. Underneath, comments rolled in. $5 says she's bluffing. $10 says she'll actually steal it. 20 minutes have passed. Did she get the letter? I was blissfully unaware of the chaos online as I rummaged through Ethan's study, flipping through drawers and pulling things out until the desk was completely overturned. In my past life, I had found the letters here. Why couldn't I find them now? Determined, I bent down to check beneath the desk when the door suddenly swung open. A tall figure blocked the light, casting a long shadow across the room. I shot up from under the desk, my eyes wide as I stared at Ethan. We hadn't seen each other in half a month, and his calm demeanor didn't show even a trace of warmth. What are you doing, Vivian? His voice was quiet, lacking any hint of reunion tenderness. Panicking, I grabbed our bewildered son and pushed him forward. It's his fault. I was just cleaning up the mess. Our son grinned, showing off his gap-toothed smile. Daddy, he chirped in his tiny voice. Ethan naturally picked him up and glanced at the open safe nearby. His brow arched slightly. Wow, impressive. You even know the password. I laughed awkwardly, despair filling my heart as Ethan handed our son off to the nanny. She kindly closed the door on her way out, leaving me alone with him. I heard, Ethan began casually, that you went to a bar while I was away. Oh no, did he know about my compliments for that handsome guy? My instinct screamed at me to retreat back under the desk, but Ethan grabbed me effortlessly, lifting me and placing me atop the desk instead. With a click, he unfastened his watch and placed it on the chair. Terrified, I immediately confessed. I'm sorry, I just glanced at it, and, made a few polite compliments. Ethan paused his movements, his voice dropping. Compliments to whom? Vivian. I stammered, completely flustered. Finally, I blurted out, I was trying to steal your love letters. His lips descended in a searing kiss, cutting off my frantic rambling. Did you find them? His low, raspy voice made my knees weak as I braced myself against his shoulder. I had no idea where to start looking, let alone what I'd do if I actually found the letters. Then I remembered my best friend's skeptical look and thought, I have to show her proof. But before I could act, Ethan's quiet laughter interrupted my thoughts. Vivian, he said softly, some things aren't meant to be shared with others. You're lying, I retorted, my voice faltering. I already saw them. The words caught in my throat. Something had changed in this lifetime. In the past, even under Ethan's cold, aloof exterior, his love letters were written with such passion that they felt like they were etched into my soul. But now, I couldn't predict what he might write, or if he even still wrote them at all. Realizing the potential embarrassment ahead, I panicked. I don't want to see them anymore, I blurted. Ethan didn't give me the option. Holding me firmly, he carried me to a cabinet. The polished surface reflected my horrified expression, layer by layer, like peeling an onion. No, stop, I stammered, covering my face with my hands. I don't want to look. It's too late, he replied calmly, opening a hidden compartment. A cascade of letters spilled out, one after another, neatly stacked and sealed. Ethan casually grabbed one, tore it open, and handed it to me. Vivian, he said gently, I love you so much. The words on the page made my face burn scarlet. Pervert. Pervert. I don't want to read this anymore. I tried to push it away, but Ethan wasn't about to let me off the hook. He held my chin lightly, his voice soft and coaxing. Vivian, I've been waiting for so long. Read it out loud for me. Will you? In my flustered panic, I slapped him. Not hard, but enough to make a sound. To my surprise, Ethan laughed, his deep voice tinged with amusement. If that's how you want to play, he teased, you can do it again. A little harder this time, if you'd like. Ethan, you're a total maniac, I shrieked, squirming in his grip. Let me go. I already told you, he murmured with maddening calm. You can't escape. And for ogling other men? That's an added offense. That day, Ethan locked me in the study for 24 hours. When I finally emerged, I never mentioned the love letters again. Later, during a media interview, a journalist asked me, Miss Vivian, those love letters you mentioned, where are they exactly? By then, my bravado from before had completely disappeared. Without missing a beat, I looked straight into the camera and said, What love letters? I was just talking nonsense.